Chapter 1952. Before Ancestor Yao Han and the other two arrived, Zhang Yan had already sensed it from the fluctuations of magic power. In a battle between spirit refinement cultivators, either the difference in cultivation was too great, or one side was caught off guard and made a mistake. Otherwise, there was no such thing as being ambushed, and it was a battle of magic power. Even if the enemy killed Wan Zhen, it was impossible for it to be so quiet. Just like before Taoist Zhan Yuan warned him, he could already feel the huge pressure. At this moment, he saw a magic treasure descending from the opposite side. He immediately activated his mana and tried to block it. However, this thing was very sharp. The treasure light that he had set up to cover the outside was torn apart like thin paper. The magic treasure directly broke in. He could not help but stare at it. He had never seen this treasure before, so it must have been refined after the last defeat. Otherwise, it would have been taken out long ago and not hidden until now. There was no doubt that it was used to deal with him. As such, he now had to face pressure from two different directions. On one hand, he was being pressured by Yao Han and the other two. On the other hand, he was being pressured by the treasures. If he were to face them all at once, it would obviously be inappropriate. He could only defeat them one by one. He made up his mind and did not hesitate. He made a few deductions from the broken jade and calculated the changes in his magic power. Then, his intent was reflected outside and suddenly erupted. In an instant, the magic power surged like a raging wave. Ancestor Yao Han and the other two had learned their lesson last time and were prepared. They knew that Zhang Yan's magic power would be launched without warning, so they were not caught off guard this time. But at the same time, Zhang Yan's magic power was more profound than last time, so the level of magic power was higher. Even though they were prepared, they could only barely hold their ground under the tyrannical pressure. Not only did the magic power they had sent out not advance, it even seemed to be retreating. Zhang Yan suppressed the three of them, so he had time to focus on dealing with the magic treasure that was flying towards him. With a thought, the tiny golden bead flew up and turned into a ray of golden light that flew towards the magic treasure. Boom! The two magic treasures collided head-on, but the jade all only paused for a moment. Its momentum did not change at all. Zhang Yan saw that the tiny golden bead's attack had failed, so he continued to urge it to collide with it again. In just a moment, both sides had collided several dozen times, but the jade all seemed to be unshakable. Even though its momentum was slightly hindered, it was still unswervingly charging in. He stared at it and knew that this attack could not be avoided. He had to think of a way to block it. Otherwise, if it penetrated into the real world behind it, it was very likely that the other three would discover the real world where Bu Su Tian was. So he repeatedly activated the tiny golden bead. Although he kept the magic treasure still, it was like it was stuck in a quagmire, and it was difficult to move. Patriarch Yao Han and the other two also felt their magic treasures being obstructed. This time, they had come for a quick victory because they were afraid that others would take advantage of them if the battle dragged on. Therefore, they didn't have any more tricks up their sleeves. They hurriedly took out their defensive magic treasures to block a portion of Zhang Yan's invading magic power. Then, they used the rest of their power on their magic treasures, pushing them deeper into the depths. The three of them had chosen to defend, and now that they had this, their fighting ability had increased by more than a little. Although they had to pay a heavy price, if they could win over Bu Su Tian, then there was nothing to regret. Zhang Yan saw that the tiny golden bead could no longer block the jade all. His eyes flashed, and the crystal jade water droplets that had been covering the real world suddenly appeared out of thin air, blocking the way. But this only slightly hindered the jade all's momentum, and it still passed through. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of him. If the treasure was hit, although it would not do much to him, it would definitely disrupt his magic power, and he would lose his advantage. His eyes flashed, and he did not dodge. Instead, he stretched out a finger and touched the magic treasure. In an instant, the opposing magic power was pushed back, and the next moment, the jade all was knocked off course. The moment the treasure shot out, it broke through several layers of obstacles and penetrated deep into the core area. It could not be said to be weak, but this place was also the closest to him, and it was also the place where the magic power was the strongest. Without a doubt, It collided head-on with the strongest point. The Jade All's attack failed and suddenly disappeared, but it was called back by Patriarch Yao Han and the other two. They knew that they had no chance to attack again, but this magic treasure could be used repeatedly. If the first time failed, they could find another chance to throw it. Just now, attacking with all their might was not completely fruitless. It was because of the Jade All that they were able to break into the depths of Zhang Yan's ripples and peek into the real world behind him. Patriarch Yao Han calculated and said, "Although I found a few places, I can't be sure. I need to observe more." He originally thought that even if the current world that led to Busha Heaven was hidden, the river of the current world was definitely still evolving and had not finished. As long as he found such a place, he would be able to identify the true location of the door based on the connection of cause and effect. Just now Patriarch Yao Han found a few suspicious places, but this was clearly impossible. It could only be that Zhang Yan had set it up in advance. Because of this, he suspected that what he saw was not the real target. Taoist Jade Leek said, "No problem, let's try again." He waved his sleeve and threw the Jade All into the river again. After Zhang Yan had fought this magic treasure once, he already had a rough understanding of its ability, so he dealt with it very calmly this time. Just like last time, he first used the Tai Golden Pearl to weaken its force, and after the treasure went deep into his body, he used his magic power to expel it. But then, the three of them repeatedly used the treasure. He knew that this person was doing this to find out where Bu Su Tian was. But at the same time, as he came into contact with this magic treasure more and more, he could gradually figure out its structure. If he kept using it to attack it, it would not be difficult to suppress it after he finished his calculations. It all depended on who could reach their goal first. While he was calculating, he felt a slight disturbance in his magic power. Someone else was approaching him. But he did not move and continued to deal with the situation before him. Since he could sense it, then Patriarch Yao Han and the others should be able to sense it as well. If this person was with him, or if he had help, then there was no need for the three of them to arrive first. They could just deal with him together. If not, then this person's goal would be in conflict with Patriarch Yao Han and the others. So if this person appeared now, they would be even more anxious than him. After probing for a dozen times and making various deductions, Yu Lu and the other two finally determined a place. They felt that it was very likely to be the door that led to Bu Su Tian. Even though it was difficult to enter under the obstruction of Zhang Yan's power, they could still use it to obtain more karma. Forefather Yao Han felt that something wasn't quite right. Although he could not see anything wrong, he felt that things had gone too smoothly this time. Perhaps they should be more cautious. Just as he was about to speak, Taoist Yu Lu suddenly said, "Fellow Taoists, someone else has arrived." Taoist Yu Qiu said, "Fellow Taoist Yao Han, we cannot wait any longer. Please act quickly." Patriarch Yao Han also sensed that there was a powerful Whaley approaching. This person was not simple. He knew that he could not delay any longer. He pointed at the sapling and sent his karma into it. But then his expression changed. "Not good. The karma here is chaotic. We've fallen into Taoist Zhang's trap." He had wanted to use a spell to expel the karma that had mixed in, but it was like two muddy and clear waters mixing together. The more it stirred, the more muddy it became. Knowing that he could not continue, he immediately stopped. Taoist Yu Lu also saw the problem. He calmly said, "It's fine. I have this magic treasure in hand. As long as I seize the karma, it will only be a matter of starting anew." With a thought, the Jade All shot forward again. But at this moment, suddenly, a funnel of white qi appeared out of thin air, blocking the path of the treasure. With just a turn, the Jade All disappeared into thin air. Patriarch Yao Han and the other two's expressions changed. They were able to seize the initiative this time because of this magic treasure. They did not expect it to be taken away by someone else. They turned their heads and saw that in the silence, a Taoist in green stood there quietly. No one knew when he had appeared. He looked at the three of them as if he was thinking about something, but he seemed uncertain at the same time. Taoist Yu Qiu stood up and bowed. "May I know who you are? Why are you making things difficult for us?" The azure-robed Taoist ignored him. He looked at Patriarch Yao Han and said, "I recognize you. But I don't recognize these two. He pointed at Taoist Yu Qiu and Taoist Yu Qiu. Patriarch Yao Han frowned. I don't seem to have any dealings with you. The azure-robed Taoist's expression was calm. He said, I don't care what you're planning. Just retreat. I won't make things difficult for you. Patriarch Yao Han solemnly said, Do you think we have a chance of winning if we work together? Taoist Yu Qiu said, This person's magic treasure is powerful and his cultivation is a level higher than mine. If we fight now, it will be difficult to win. There are still people watching from the outside, and they are enemies, not friends. That's why they don't want to clash with me. Why don't we retreat for now and see what he does? It won't be too late to come up with a plan. Taoist Yu Qiu also said, Taoist Yu Qiu is right. We are only here for Taoist Zhang's backer, Bu Shutian. Since we are in a difficult position, it's fine to take a step back. After some discussion, the three of them did not insist. They cupped their fists and retreated to the side. Seeing that the three of them were unwilling to leave, the green-robed Taoist didn't mind. He turned around and looked at where Zhang Yan was. He cupped his hands and said, Greetings, fellow Taoist. Today, I have returned to discuss a matter with you. Can you allow me to speak? Zhang Yan's heart stirred. He waved his sleeves and dispersed his magic power. He returned the bow and said, Taoist, please come closer. Chapter 1953. When Taoist Zhang Yun saw the azure-robed Taoist, his expression turned serious and he said, Fellow Taoist, that person is here. Then he saw the azure-robed Taoist put away the magic treasures of Yao Han ancestor and the others. He frowned and said, I wonder what he wants to do. The Taoist sitting there said, Let's see what he does. While they were talking, the azure-robed Taoist rebuked Yao Han ancestor and the others. Then he was invited by Zhang Yan. Taoist Zhang Yuan frowned. He didn't expect the azure-robed Taoist to do this. After thinking for a moment, he turned his head and said, Fellow Taoist, I thought we should stop them from talking. The Taoist pondered for a moment and said, No. That Taoist Zhang doesn't trust me. If we stop him rashly, he will be even more suspicious. From what I heard from you, fellow Taoist Zhang is a very determined person. He won't be easily swayed by words, so let him speak. Taoist Zhang Yuan said worriedly, But if we sit here and do nothing, we will lose the initiative. The Taoist remained calm and said, Don't worry. Let's wait a little longer. Zhang Yan watched the azure-robed Taoist walk through the void and gradually approach them. He asked, How should I address you, fellow Taoist? The azure-robed Taoist said, I used to be called Saint Song Qingxing. Now that I've cut off one of my names, everyone calls me Saint Song. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, So it's fellow Taoist Saint Song. In the spirit refinement realm, it was common for magic power to fuse and collide. The closer one was, the more intense the battle would be. However, like Taoist Zhang Yuan, this person's magic power fluctuated very little. Either his cultivation had reached a certain level, or he had hidden magic treasures. Judging from his aura, it was this person who had given him such heavy pressure earlier, so he thought it was more likely that it was the former. Although Taoist Zhang Yuan had described this person as dangerous, he didn't really believe it. It wasn't because this person was polite up until now, but because he never judged his opponents based on their superficial behavior. If this person was really that crazy, then the other spirit refinement cultivators would definitely join forces to eliminate him. How would he dare to appear here so brazenly? Just as he was thinking, Taoist Qingxing said, Zhang Yuan should have come to find you, right? Zhang Yan had nothing to hide and said, That's right. Qingxing said calmly, That person must have said that I am a self-centered person who sees everything as a burden and wants to kill everything. Zhang Yan smiled and didn't answer. Qingxing said bluntly, Actually, Zhang Yuan is right. I do have such thoughts, but I also know that there are things that can be done and things that cannot be done. It is too stupid to fight against so many people alone. Zhang Yan agreed. He could sense that besides himself, this person viewed everyone else as foreign objects that could be destroyed. The reason why he hadn't done so was because he didn't have the ability to do so at the moment, so he could only endure it for now. What Qing Sheng said was to tell him that even though he had such thoughts, at least he didn't plan to be his enemy. Qing Sheng said, I have something to discuss with you. Zhang Yan wanted to hear what Qing Sheng wanted to say, so he made an inviting gesture and said, "Please speak, Taoist." Qing Sheng looked at the thousands of worlds around him and said, "If I'm not wrong, there is a place behind you that contains the essence of creation?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "There is indeed such a place." This matter couldn't be hidden. Since the three of them had found their way to the door, anyone with a discerning eye would know what was going on. Moreover, if he didn't sense anything, Taoist Qing Sheng wouldn't have come looking for him. Qing Sheng said, "This is a natural land of creation and there are many uses for it. I've seen you use the fragments of the essence of creation to craft a treasure. I'm sure you understand that if there's enough of it, it can be used as a shelter for someone." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. When his consciousness entered Bu Su Tian, he had a feeling that he could directly enter this place. To him, Bu Su Tian was like a vast ocean that couldn't be fathomed. It wasn't something that could be shaken by external forces. If he set it up properly and had some tricks up his sleeves, he could indeed use this place as a shelter. Qing Sheng's words made him think of another possibility. If he could make good use of this place, it could be of great help to him. He thought about it and asked, "Could it be that you want to use this place to shelter someone?" Qing Sheng admitted, "I will be in trouble in the future. Only by finding the essence of creation behind you can I avoid it. I don't want anything from you, I just want you to let me hide when the time comes." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and didn't say a word. Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't reply, Qing Sheng said, "Of course. There is no proof, and I am not bound by promises. I will not let you work for nothing. If you agree, I can take all the remnants of the essence of creation and give them all to you to repay the favor." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If I were to walk the path of self-seeking, wouldn't these be useless?" Qing Sheng said, "The path of self-seeking does not require external help, but it doesn't mean that I don't need external help. If I don't have any treasures, how can I compete with others? How can I take the treasures of Yao Han and the others? Moreover, the emptiness is also an external help. How can I get rid of it? Before I reach the last step, I still need external help. Even if there is a difference, it is just a difference in emphasis." Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "If I need it, I will take it myself. I will not ask others to take it." Qing Sheng was surprised that Xin Lian rejected him. He looked at Xin Lian and his eyes became sharper. He said, "Are you not afraid that I will take it by force?" Zhang Yan looked calm. If Qing Sheng could take it by force, there was no need for him to say unnecessary words. Since he was able to find Bu Shu Tian, he could also hide it. Although doing so might cause him to be unable to find this place in the future, if he really couldn't protect it, then he could still make a decision. He looked up and said, "I was also thinking that since the essence of creation can be used to shelter people of the same generation, then it can also be used to imprison people. If I can keep you here today, then I can end this matter. There is no need to wait for the future." Ever since Qing Sheng appeared, he had been calm as if everything was in his control. However, when he heard what Xin Lian said, his expression changed. Although he was confident that his cultivation was better than Zhang Yan's in terms of mana, he might not necessarily be able to suppress the latter. One must know that he was standing at the place where Zhang Yan's mana was the most concentrated, so he had a greater advantage. If that was all, he could still deal with it. However, there were still people watching him from the outside. He was sure that if he fought with Zhang Yan, this person might come to make things difficult for him. Then, it would not be an empty promise to suppress him in the essence of creation. Although Taoist Jade Leek and the other two were still outside, because he had taken their treasures, they would definitely be happy to see this. After realizing this, he said, "Since fellow Taoist feels that it is inappropriate, then there is no need to rush this matter. I will naturally deliver the good fortune fragment to you, and fellow Taoist will understand my sincerity. I will take my leave first." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since you are here, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Also, I have one more thing to ask." Just now, he did have the intention to make the other party stay and find a way to trap him in Bu Shu Tian. However, After thinking about it again, even if he could do it, his future would not be stable. As ancestor Yao Han said, as long as Bushutian was here, there would be more people looking for him. With this person outside, if he really went around to steal the essence of creation, then he would be able to gain more time to improve his cultivation. Thus, he gave up on this idea. As for why he spoke now, it was because he had a question in his mind. Qing Sheng stopped and said, "You are too polite. If I know, I will definitely tell you." Zhang Yan said, "Just now, when you arrived, you said you knew Ancestor Yao Han, but he did not seem to know you. Why is that?" Qing Sheng nodded and said, "I see. The way to seek oneself is to break through the stubbornness of truth. After breaking through the truth, there will be gains and losses. I think that others can see that I am willing to give up and I am willing to accept it." Zhang Yan thought about it and understood what he meant. According to Qing Sheng, after breaking through the stubbornness of truth, he gave up a part of Ancestor Yao Han's memory of himself. Because his cultivation was higher than Ancestor Yao Han's, Ancestor Yao Han did not recognize him. This was not because Qing Sheng was deliberately targeting someone, but because of his way of seeking oneself. He viewed everyone as his enemy, so he did his best to make everyone in the same generation ignore him. As for those with similar or equivalent cultivation, they should not be affected by this. If this person's existence could be hidden from everyone, then Taoist Zhang Yuan would not have come to warn them. He nodded and said, "Thank you for clearing my doubts." Qing Sheng looked at him and said, "However, there is something mysterious about Ancestor Yao Han. You need to be careful when you come down. You need to know that we are not the only ones who want to obtain the essence of creation." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered and he said, "Oh? Can you tell me more about it?" Qing Sheng pondered for a while and said, "When the creation essence broke apart, other than the fragments that were scattered in the world, many of them had turned into treasures. Now they are floating in the void. However, many of them were born with great fortune and merged with our divine qi, allowing them to take human form. Although they do not have the ability to open up the world, they have a strong foundation and are no weaker than us. They are the real treasures of creation. If we can subdue one of them, we will be invincible even if we can't defeat our enemies." Qing Sheng pondered for a while and said, "When the creation essence broke apart, other than the fragments that were scattered in countless worlds, many of them had turned into treasures on their own. However, there are also some who have always been enemies with me because they can only rely on good fortune fragments to improve their cultivations. So, every time something like this appears and is noticed by them, they will definitely come to seize it." Speaking to here, he said, "I have had dealings with this person before, relying on my cultivation. I have never been taken advantage of. But just now, I saw that Taoist Yao Han's body, there was a similar presence of qi. Therefore, if this person is not involved with him, then he must have had dealings with him before. Friend, you must be careful." Chapter 1954. Zhang Yan did not expect Patriarch Yao Han to have such a background. Whether the Patriarch Yao Han attacked him out of his own will or was it related to the treasure spirit of creation that Azure Saint mentioned, it was hard to tell. It seemed like there was no difference, but under the circumstances where the Patriarch Yao Han could not get what he wanted, there was a possibility that the Patriarch Yao Han was drawn out. He nodded and said, "Thank you for your reminder." Azure Saint said, "You don't have to thank me. Before I get what I want, I don't want the treasure spirit of creation to be taken away by others." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There are many who want it, but no one, including you, has been able to get what they want." Azure Saint stared at him for a moment and said, "That's good. I only hope that you can guard it well. Once I'm done, I will come and find you." He paused for a while and waved his sleeve, and a green jade talisman flew out. "This is my token. If you encounter any difficulties in the future, or if you change your mind, you can use this. I will sense it and come to you." As he spoke, he cupped his fists and left. This time, Zhang Yan did not stop him. He split the waves of mana and let them go. Azure Saint came out of Zhang Yan's whirlpool and was about to leave when Taoist Yu Qiu came up and bowed. "Friend, please wait." Azure Saint stopped and asked, "What's the matter?" Taoist Yu Qiu said, "Just now, You took away our treasure to stop us from fighting. Now that the matter is over, can you return it to us? Azure Saint glanced at him and said, I live in Songqing world. If you want the treasure back, you can come here. I will be waiting for you. Taoist Yuqiu was not annoyed and smiled, all right. Since you invited me, I will come and disturb you. Azure Saint ignored him and flicked his sleeve. His body turned into a ray of light and he flew into the depths of the void. He'd told Zhang Yanyan that he would collect the fragments of essence of creation, and this was indeed his true thoughts. For the sake of avoiding that future danger, he had no choice but to do this. Even though Taoist Yuqiu had quite a few fragments, he didn't intend to make a move against Taoist Yuqiu because he was extremely fearful of those treasure spirits of creation, and he guessed that they might be setting up something. Under the current circumstances, they didn't want to come into conflict with them, so they let them go for now. Taoist Yuqiu watched as Qin Mu's silhouette flew further and further away from the crowd. His mana rippled until he could no longer sense Qin Mu's presence. He then turned back and repeated what he had told Qin Sheng. He then sighed and said, This person is the one who stabilized the world. It seems like we won't be able to retrieve the treasure. Any cultivator who had achieved the world-stopping realm would have reached a certain level of attainment. He deduced that Qin Sheng had most likely passed the understanding truth barrier and this was not something that they could deal with. Taoist Yuqiu said, But without the treasure, we won't be able to win against Taoist Zhang. Ancestor Yao Han frowned. Losing the treasure was serious, but it was not the most important thing. If they failed this time, they could think of other ways. But from Azure Saint's attitude, there must be some collusion between the two. If Zhang Yan was helped, it would be difficult for them to have another chance. Taoist Yuqiu said, It seems like there is no chance this time. Why don't we retreat first? Taoist Yuqiu nodded and asked, What does Taoist Yao Han think? Ancestor Yao Han sighed, That's the only way. It was not that they were careless this time, but it was hard to guard against such a sudden change. This was not the first time they encountered such a situation. Fortunately, cultivating the spirit meant eternal life. Usually, a momentary defeat did not mean anything. Instead, the price they had to pay was too high and the rewards were too little. The three left after coming to an agreement. Before leaving, Ancestor Yao Han turned back and looked at the thousands of realms behind him. He suddenly had a premonition that if he retreated now, he would not have another chance to take Busu Tian. Zhang Yan watched as the three of them retreated. He knew that this matter was over. Their treasures had been taken away, and before they found a way to deal with him, they would not come back. Also, he could sense that there were no other dangers. He could live in peace for a while. However, after listening to Qin Sheng's words, he understood that even after attaining the spirit refinement realm and gaining boundless power, he would still face a lot of dangers. But he felt that this was not a bad thing. Looking at these dangers, they were all because of the competition between people of the same generation. He once told Zhang Yuan that as a cultivator, one should not be afraid of danger, only afraid that there would be no path to the Grand Tao. Just like how the spirit refinement cultivators fought against each other, the competition between cultivators was also a part of seeking the Tao. It was unavoidable. People like Azure Saint who only pursued their own Tao could not avoid this. If they did not fight, then they could only sit and wait for others to find them. Only by being above many people of the same generation could one ensure their own safety. Only by having a higher cultivation could one achieve this. These two aspects pushed each other. Under this pressure, everyone either passively or actively walked toward the Grand Tao. But this also gave rise to a problem that he had been thinking about ever since he became a spirit refinement cultivator. It could be said that there were countless realms reflected in the void, so from this, there should be countless spirit refinement cultivators as well. But this was not the case at all. Based on his own experience, it was impossible for such a figure to exist in the main world that wasn't tainted by the essence of creation. Moreover, the fragment of creation essence had not reached a certain level, so it could not contain the spirit refinement Whaley. It was like how an arowana could not float in a shallow pond. Even if one could grow, they could only be trapped in it and could not leave. Only existences like Bu Su Tian could transcend the world. There should be very few of such existences. Just looking at what Ancestor Yao Han and the others had done was enough to prove it. Another reason was that he also tried to observe the world and search for the fragment of the essence of creation, but he didn't find anything. Hence, he deduced that it might even take the initiative to avoid the almighty cultivators of the spirit refinement realm. He didn't want to find it just because he wanted to. Other than that, he deduced that some of the fragments might have been affected by the great force when it collapsed, which was why they hadn't appeared yet. On the other hand, many people of the same generation had been looking for the location of the creation essence. Whenever they saw it, they would definitely take it. This further reduced the possibility of the spirit refinement cultivators appearing. While he was thinking, a clear light came from the distance. At the same time, there were waves of mana. It was obvious that another person of the same generation had arrived. He looked up and smiled. "I knew that you would be here." Taoist Sun Yuan came up and bowed. "Sorry to disturb you, but Azure Saint and I have always been enemies, so I wanted to ask why you are here." Zhang Yan said, "This person is a little different from what you have described." Taoist Sun Yuan asked in a deep voice, "Then do you think that what I said the day before was biased?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That is not the case. I know that this person has the intention to destroy all external things, but he does not have the strength to do so at the moment. If he sees that I am easy to bully, he will most likely attack me immediately. It is just that he has some scruples this time, so he did not immediately fall out with me." Taoist Sun Yun looked at him and said, "Have you made a promise with this person?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said with a smile, "I have never promised anything. However, the world changes. Today's friends may become tomorrow's enemies, and today's enemies may become tomorrow's friends." Hearing this, Taoist Sun Yun thought for a while and sighed. The great Tao is difficult to pursue. One person walking alone is not as good as many people walking together. Zhang Yan said, "That is true. I think that there is no need to distinguish between friend and foe so clearly, unless there is a cause and effect that cannot be solved." At this moment, Taoist Sun Yuan understood Zhang Yan's true attitude. He would not deliberately favor anyone, and he treated everyone who had not become enemies with him the same way. Taoist Sun Yuan thought that this was not necessarily a bad thing. Although he could not make Zhang Yan stand on his side for the time being, he did not have to worry about him being roped in by others. Thus, he nodded and said, "Thank you for your frankness. I will not disturb your cultivation any longer. I will take my leave now." At this time, Zhang Yan said, "Wait, Taoist Sun Yuan." Taoist Sun Yuan said, "Is there anything else, Taoist Sun Yuan?" Zhang Yan said, "Does Taoist Sun Yuan know about the treasure spirit of creation?" Taoist Sun Yuan suddenly fell silent. After a while, he said, "Azure Saint told you about this?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If there is any difficulty, just pretend that I did not ask." Taoist Sun Yuan thought for a while and said, "It is not convenient for me to comment on this matter. I only have one thing to say. Even if it is the treasure spirit of creation, it may not necessarily be your enemy." Zhang Yan looked at him for a while and nodded. Taoist Sun Yuan cupped his hands, said goodbye, and left. Zhang Yan thought for a while and realized that Taoist Sun Yuan probably had some connection with the treasure spirit of creation. Taoist Qing Sheng probably knew about this and deliberately told him about it so that Zhang Yan would have some misgivings about this person. However, as long as they did not make an enemy of him, he did not need to care about their identity. He turned his mind and immersed his consciousness in Bu Shutian once again. He had learned a lot from his conversation with Qing Sheng and understood that Bu Shutian was a place he could rely on. In this case, if he could make use of Bu Shutian and take control of this place, he would have a place he could rely on. When that time came, he would not need to be too afraid of external enemies. After Taoist Sun Yuan bade farewell to Zhang Yan, he returned to the frozen present world. When he saw the Taoist, he told him about their conversation. The Taoist sighed and said, "Speaking of which, we have never helped this Taoist Zhang before. We only warned him a few times, which is a small matter. His words are understandable, but I am afraid that he has been bewitched by Qing Sheng and sees me as an enemy." Taoist Sun Yuan slowly said, "Perhaps we have done wrong from the beginning." The Taoist looked at him and said, "What do you mean, Taoist Zhang? Taoist Sun said in a deep voice, I think I should let Taoist Zhang know about all my plans. When he saw that the Taoist was silent, he continued, Previously, we have been thinking of doing him a favor and then trying to win him over. But I think it is better to be sincere about this matter. Whether Taoist Zhang agrees or refuses, it is better to let him know that we are not enemies. In the face of a common enemy, we can even help each other. The Taoist thought for a long time and finally nodded. Perhaps Taoist Zhang is right. I have been too cautious in the past. But now, this Taoist Zhang may not believe me. It is better to wait for a chance to talk about this matter. Chapter 1955. Zhang Yan's consciousness once again entered Bu Su Tian. This time, it was not only to comprehend the mysteries and improve his cultivation, but also to find a way to control this domain. Only then could he fight against the enemies from the outside. However, after immersing himself for a long time, just like the last time, he felt as if he was facing an ocean of chaos. His thoughts and consciousness could float up and down, but if he wanted to make it his own, he was unable to do so, and it always seemed empty and powerless. Ever since he achieved true yang, most things could be done with just a thought. It had been a long time since he had such a feeling. After an unknown amount of time, he still could not find a clue. He knew that this was not a solution, so he slowly withdrew and began to think. Just like how he could borrow Bu Su Tian's Weili to a certain extent by looking into the depths of Bu Su Tian, he believed that there must be a key here. As long as he controlled this place, he could control the entire Bu Su Tian. Just now, his consciousness wandered for a long time and searched deeper, but he still could not find it. He even felt a certain amount of pressure. From this situation, it seemed that his cultivation was not enough. Although he could sink in, he was still lacking from finding the thing. If he wanted to do this, it seemed that he first needed to improve his cultivation. If there was no other way, then he could only try to find more fragments of the essence of creation or work on his own cultivation. Fortunately, Bu Su Tian was different. It was where the essence of creation was, so as long as he guarded this place, he would naturally be able to do this. It could be said that there was no delay in either. Thus, like before, he focused on comprehending the mysteries and allowed the various truths of the great Tao to reflect on himself. However, he did not dare to immerse too deeply. If there was anything wrong, he would immediately withdraw, purify, and then repeat the process again. As he diligently cultivated, his cultivation also increased. However, after sensing and calculating, he was still very far from controlling Bu Su Tian. Although there was no past or future in Bu Su Tian, after withdrawing his consciousness, it would take time to understand the truths of the great Tao. Although it was safe now, it did not mean that there would be no trouble. If he delayed for even a moment, it would give the enemies who were looking for Bu Su Tian more opportunities. He pondered, could it be that I really have to enter with my real body in order to enjoy great benefits? This was an extremely great temptation. If he were to enter, then the next time he came out, he might be able to fight against all of his peers. However, he was extremely vigilant towards this in his heart. Because if he were to enter it, then the slightest mistake would cause him to be unable to circulate and comprehend the truths of the Grand Tao in time. Thus, he would be passively fused into it, and he wouldn't be himself anymore. Moreover, he kept having the feeling that something was slightly off here. After thinking for a while, he decided to stop his cultivation for the time being. Instead, he would deduce and see if there were any areas that he had overlooked. After carefully deducing for a long time, he finally found the problem. If he entered directly, he would be protected by Bu Su Tian, but he would also be restricted by him. First of all, entering and leaving would not be easy. In the past, when he broke through the barrier of the world to enter the inner realm, it would take years or even decades. Now that he had to face Bu Su Tian, he would have to face the same situation. Although there would be no past or future when he comprehended here, he would still be delayed when he wanted to leave. Most importantly, if he didn't make it out in time, he would be completely lost in this place. However, he also thought that since the Azure Saint dared to say that he needed to enter the inner realm to hide, then perhaps he wouldn't be affected by the Azure Saint. However, it was also possible that the treasure on his body could protect him. Thinking about this, he thought, it seems like I can only try to pass the inner realm first and see if I can enter with my real body. However, the problem was that it was too slow to rely on just comprehending the essence of creation. That was why he believed that he could only focus on seeking his own path in order to increase his cultivation in the shortest amount of time. He immediately split off a sliver of his consciousness and began to observe his own body. The way to seek one's own path was to rely on oneself and look forward to the grand Tao. However, this was not something that could be done out of thin air. If one couldn't find the right direction, then even if one could increase their cultivation, the increase would be minimal. Only by finding the right path could one increase their cultivation. If there was a comparison, the former was like scattering one's power aimlessly. Although it was boundless, the harvest was very small. The latter was concentrating one's power in one place and moving in one direction. This way, the results would quickly be seen. However, at the same time, all the obstacles in seeking one's own path came from oneself. If one's cultivation was not firm enough, then it was likely that they would frequently encounter obstacles in the future. Once they couldn't get past them, they would begin to doubt themselves, and their cultivation would likely never increase again. That was why one couldn't be too eager for quick success. One had to know one's own strength and always be clear about one's own path. It was no wonder that Taoist Zhang Yuan and the Yao Han ancestor chose to seek one of the two paths instead of cultivating both. This was not only because the two paths seemed different on the surface, but it was also to avoid more variables during cultivation. However, he believed that clinging to a single path was a kind of fear in itself. It was the persistence of one's Tao heart that led to the dangers of the path later on. It was not the other way around. As long as one had the right Tao heart, these could be avoided. For example, Qing Sheng's Tao heart was to cut off all external objects. Yao Han and the others sought external help, but the Tao heart was to regain the essence of creation and reopen the door to the grand Tao. The path he chose was different from the two, so what should his Tao heart be? He couldn't help but think of the time when he entered the heavenly cave. In order to create a method that didn't require external objects, this method could actually be regarded as seeking one's own self. But even if one didn't need external objects to cultivate, living in the world, one couldn't do without external needs. Therefore, abandoning external objects was not absolute. It was just to get rid of a certain aspect of the shackles and find a better way out. Fundamentally speaking, as long as one didn't transcend, there wasn't much difference. As soon as this thought emerged in his mind, his thoughts suddenly straightened out, and he felt that the path ahead was a little clearer. If there was self, then there was existence. If there was outside, then there was the Tao. His own Tao heart should be the same as the Tao. Once the Tao heart was established, there was a clear path to follow and there were no doubts ahead. He no longer hesitated. He began to observe himself and began to improve his cultivation from another direction. Just as he was cultivating, his disciple, Wei Zihong, was coming to Xinyuan heaven. Before Zhang Yan said that he was searching for the upper realm, he had left a doppelganger in the world. Therefore, in the eyes of the disciples, although he had gone to seek the upper realm, it felt like he hadn't really left. If there was nothing important, the disciples wouldn't come to disturb him. But not long ago, several sects in the mountain and sea realm, including Qinsong school, had suddenly experienced some unpredictable strange phenomena. The upper echelons of the sects still couldn't come to a conclusion. Fortunately, Zhang Yan, a true yang expert, was overseeing things so they could ask for help. Therefore, they asked Wei Zihong to come and ask about this matter. Not long after, Wei Zihong arrived in front of the main hall of Qinghuan Palace. As soon as he landed, he saw Jing Yu standing there. He stepped forward and cupped his hands. "Senior brother Jing, is Master here?" Jing Yu smiled. "Master knows that senior brother Wei is coming, so he specially ordered me to wait here." Wei Zihong said, "I'll have to trouble senior brother Jing." But at this time, he suddenly sensed that Jing Yu's aura seemed to be very different from before, as if he wasn't a member of this world. He didn't think too much about it. Jing Yu was his master's personal attendant, so he should be able to get some benefits. He stepped into the hall and saw Zhang Yan sitting on the jade platform. He stepped forward and bowed. Disciple pays his respects to master. Zhang Yan smiled. Dispense with the formalities. Disciple has come today for something else. Wei Zihong bowed and said, reporting to master, disciple has come to ask for master's help. The memorial tablets of the three sects, Qinsong, Shaoqing, and Netherworld, all shook at the same time. However, the sect masters and elders couldn't figure out the reason, so they asked disciple to come and ask why there was such a strange phenomenon. Zhang Yan listened and fell into deep thought. Nothing in the world could be hidden from him, especially such a change. But in order to deal with the attack of Ancestor Yao Han and the others, to ensure that the karma wasn't stolen too much, he purposely cut off the connection with the present world and didn't ask too much. In reality, if there weren't people in the present world, he wouldn't care too much about it. But now that he heard about it, he had a feeling that it might be because he was comprehending Busu's genius. He calculated in his heart, but it was a blur in front of him. He thought for a while and didn't continue to pursue the matter. The patriarchs and the unfathomable owner of the Devil Treasury should have made some arrangements on the 9 continents that day, and it might have involved Busu. But from his point of view, it wasn't as simple as pouring his consciousness into the present world. And these almighty beings wouldn't make such arrangements for no reason. If the time wasn't right, it was best not to take the initiative, or it might cause some undesirable changes. He said, I understand. When you go back, you can tell the leaders of the sects that this matter is not a problem. Tell them not to worry. Wei Zihong said yes. Now that the matter was over, he asked for guidance on the Tao. After half a month of questioning, his doubts were all resolved and he left. But when he came out, he suddenly found that his master was different from what he had seen before. His master's chi was more mysterious, but he didn't notice it at all. He stopped and couldn't help but ask, Senior brother Jing, is master already? Jing Yu looked at him, nodded, and said in a low voice, Master has returned, but there is a problem now, so it's not time to tell him. It's better if only Shangzhen knows. Wei Zihong's heart trembled. He took a deep breath and looked back at the Holy Ji Palace. He did not expect his master to have made it this far. He was both surprised and excited. At the same time, he felt a sense of heaviness in his heart. Something that could make someone of his master's level of cultivation need to be treated with caution must not be something simple. He cupped his hands at Jingyu and went to the lower worlds. Chapter 1956. After Wei Zihong retreated, Zhang Yan's consciousness turned and returned to his main body. He discovered that in that moment, the jade plate in his main body's hand seemed to have moved a little, but when he examined it again, there was no movement at all. He guessed that it was likely to be related to those strange phenomena. He thought for a moment. Since he had decided to ignore this matter, there was no need to investigate further. Not to mention that he could not see the reason behind it. Even if he could find the answer, he might not have the ability to solve it. Cultivation was the most important thing for him at the moment. These questions could be explored in the future as long as he had enough cultivation and magic power. Now that he was pursuing 2 paths at the same time, his cultivation had improved much faster than before. However, this was the limit of what he could do at the moment. It was impossible to go any faster. His magic power and cultivation were improving every moment. Ever since he stepped on the path of cultivation, he had not experienced such a situation for a long time. But although he kept going deeper into Bushutian, it was endless. It seemed that he would never be able to find the important place. He was very patient about this. The creation essence was in his hands. As long as he tried to protect it and cultivate step by step, he would eventually achieve his goal. As for the arrival of external enemies, there was no way to avoid it. Fortunately, he was improving every moment. The later this generation came, the easier it would be to deal with it. As he fully immersed himself in it, he gradually kept the external inside, and the level of his magic power also quietly rose and changed during this process. He didn't know how much time had passed, but at a certain moment, he felt a familiar magic power approaching him. He woke up from his deep meditation and opened his eyes to see that the person who had come was Taoist Jianyun. The latter cupped his hands and said, Greetings, fellow Taoist. I'm here to disturb you again. Zhang Yan smiled, shook his sleeves, and stood up to return the bow. This person had been looking for him repeatedly. If there was no accident, it should be because of Bu Shutian, who was behind him. However, this person was much more reasonable than the Yao Han ancestor. He did not use forceful methods, but always tried to repay kindness. Although he had his own motives, since the beginning of their relationship, he had never suffered a loss. On the contrary, he had benefited a lot from this person, so he did not hesitate to greet him. Taoist Sun Yan said, "Fellow Taoist once asked me why I was looking for you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Oh? Fellow Taoist, are you finally willing to speak frankly?" From the beginning to the end, he had never indicated that he wanted to stand with the other party. He had thought that the other party would not tell him everything without a definite answer. He did not expect that the other party would take the initiative to bring it up. However, he thought that the other party would definitely not do this for no reason. Either something had happened that caused the original attitude to change, or he had encountered some difficulties and urgently needed his help. Taoist Zhang Yan cupped his fist again and said, "I'd like to invite you to meet someone. Would you be willing?" Zhang Yan's interest was piqued. He was afraid that the person behind Taoist Zhang Yan was the key. He said, "Since fellow Taoist has sincerely invited me, I will go with you." Taoist Zhang Yan's face lit up and he said, "However, I'm afraid that you can't go there with your real body. You need to go with your virtual body." Fearing that Zhang Yan would misunderstand, he added, "I didn't do this on purpose. That place is a fixed world. With fellow Taoist's current cultivation, it will be difficult for you to restrain your magic power. I'm afraid that it will be difficult for you to enter." Zhang Yan's interest was piqued when he heard this. He needed to improve his strength as soon as possible in order to comprehend the cultivation method and deal with external enemies. Therefore, he had no intention of leaving this place. Therefore, he immediately used his divine will and created a virtual shadow doppelganger to follow Taoist Zhang Yan. The virtual doppelganger gradually moved away from the magic power fluctuations in his body. After an unknown period of time, the area in front of him suddenly became empty. The many spirit cultivation Whaley that he could sense in the past also became very faint. He understood that the other party must have blocked it. At this time, Taoist Zhang Yan gestured, "Fellow Taoist, please look. This is where we are going." Zhang Yan looked in the direction he was pointing and saw a stagnant world that looked like amber. There was no distinction between the past and the future. This should be the fixed world that Taoist Zhang Yan had mentioned. He was not completely ignorant about this because the fusion of the spirit cultivation Dharma power would inevitably make him understand more things. However, he had never formally come into contact with it, so it was difficult for him to understand its mysteries. This time, he could take the opportunity to observe it. When Taoist Zhang Yan saw him staring at this place, he explained, "Fellow Taoist, this fixed world can only be opened by a Taoist cultivator who has broken through the stubborn truth. If we stay here, our magic power will not collide with the outside world. Therefore, it will be difficult for outsiders to find out where we are. This place can be used as a shelter." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He now understood why Taoist Zhang Yan said that it was not good to go to this place with his real body. In the nothingness, there was a distinction between the distance and the distance because of the confrontation of the spirit cultivation Dharma power. It was impossible to go to a place where one's magic power could not reach. Because the other party's magic power had completely concealed this place and was hidden in an extremely deep place, it meant that even if there was someone guiding him, he could not go there with his own strength. Presumably, only those who had broken through the stubborn truth could find each other. However, he also knew that what he saw at this moment was only the surface. There must be more complicated things hidden here. He asked, "How many places like this are there in the nothingness?" Taoist Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "It's hard to know. In the nothingness, it's not certain whether there are or not. Fellow Taoist will understand when you have obtained the power. But don't worry, this place of fixed world is usually difficult for outsiders except for those who are on good terms with us." When Zhang Yan heard this, he could not help but laugh in his heart. He thought of the last time when Qin Sheng bid farewell to him, Taoist Yu Qiu came to ask for the treasure and said that he could come to the Tsangqing fixed world to look for him. According to Zhang Yuan, it was obvious that he had made up his mind not to return it. But to say that such a place was difficult for outsiders to get close to was not necessarily true. Qing Sheng should also be able to open up such a place, but he still thought that he needed to use Busu Tian to protect himself. This showed that the fixed world was not without flaws. At least in the face of the danger that he mentioned, there was no way to resist. At this time, Taoist Zhang bowed to the fixed world and said, "Fellow Taoist, the guest has arrived." After a short while, a voice was heard from inside, saying, "It's difficult for me to come out to welcome the guest, so I'll have to trouble you to invite the guest in for a chat." Taoist Zhang said yes and made an inviting gesture, saying, "Fellow Taoist, please come with me." As he said this, he took the lead and walked inside. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and followed behind. Then he saw that the frozen world started to move, as though it was flowing. When he saw this, he couldn't help but ponder. If there was a movement in the real world, there would be the ebb and flow of life and death. The so-called frozen world was not unchanging. This was a flaw, but at the same time, it was a way for him to survive. Otherwise, if an external force destroyed this world, the person hiding in it would disappear together with him. While he was thinking, the scene before his eyes flashed, and he had already entered the fixed world. He saw that it was extremely monotonous, with no living creatures. The world was divided into two colors, black and white, and a Taoist in a loose robe was sitting in the yin and yang qi. Taoist Zhang Yuan said, "This is Taoist Shuncheng." The Taoist looked gentle and polite. He bowed to Zhang Yan from a distance and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. Please forgive me for not being able to get up." Taoist Zhang Yuan explained, "Taoist Shuncheng is confined here because of his cultivation method. I am not treating you unkindly." Zhang Yan could see that the Taoist seemed to have sealed himself in this place, and the Taoist robe on his body seemed to be a treasure. He bowed back and said, "No problem." Taoist Shuncheng opened his sleeves and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you wondering why I am doing this?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Indeed, I am a little confused." Taoist Shuncheng pointed to himself and said, "Fellow Taoist, you have seen my Taoist robe. This is my original body." Hearing this, Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly, and he immediately knew that this was the treasure spirit of creation that Azure Saint had mentioned. However, as long as the Taoist did not make an enemy of him, he did not care about his background. Moreover, the Taoist seemed to have something to ask of him, so his expression was normal. After Taoist Shuncheng said this, he saw that Zhang Yan did not show any hostility, just like when they met just now. He could not help but relax a little, knowing that he could continue the conversation. He sighed and said, "After I killed the stubborn truth, I thought I had passed this hurdle. Unfortunately, I did not expect that I actually had two consciousnesses. Originally, neither of us was aware of the other's existence, but once the stubborn truth was lost, we could sense each other. However, we had different views on the path of Tao, which was extremely extreme and regarded Tao as an enemy. Fortunately, I was occupying the main body at that time, so I sealed myself to avoid being implicated." When Zhang Yan heard this, he finally understood that natural treasure spirits possessed stubbornness as well. But when he thought about it, it was indeed so. Even if it was a treasure spirit born from the essence of creation, it would still possess traces of existence before it manifested, and it would naturally be different after it fused and transformed. Taoist Shuncheng's situation was indeed a big problem. He had two separate consciousnesses, but their Tao perceptions were different. If he did not solve this problem, he was afraid that he would not be able to do anything. He said, "Those two Taoist friends invited I here. Is it related to this?" Taoist Shuncheng said, "Yes." Taoist Zhang Yuan said, "Taoist friend Shuncheng and the other one are now taking turns to control the body. At first, they were in a stalemate, but the other one used some unknown method to make his cultivation level higher than Taoist friend Shuncheng's. Although it is not obvious at the moment, it will be difficult to suppress him in the long run. Taoist friend Shuncheng has tried many methods, but to no avail." Later, he found that unless he can greatly improve his cultivation level and calculate the reason for this change, he will have a chance to gain the upper hand. Taoist Shunchang shook his head and said, "This is not the most troublesome thing." When the other one was in the body, he was still looking for other treasure spirits of creation. Although he has not found any results yet, if this continues, he will succeed sooner or later. At this time, Taoist Zhanyun solemnly bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "Now, only the essence of creation in your hand can save Taoist friend Shuncheng." Chapter 1957. Zhang Yan listened to their conversation but did not respond immediately. Instead, he was deep in thought. Taoist Shunchang's consciousness was split into two and his body was the only one. Logically speaking, no matter which side had the upper hand, their mana and cultivation level should be the same. The current situation was probably related to the manifestation of the treasure. Although he did not know the reason behind it, if it was a cultivator with a human body, it would not be like this. He would have found out about this during his cultivation and either solved the problem beforehand or he had already made the necessary arrangements. From the looks of it, although the treasure spirit of creation was blessed by nature, it was only because of the essence of creation. In terms of cultivation level, it might not be as good as those cultivators who cultivated properly. However, if it was as he said, the other consciousness had already connected to an outsider, it would be a big problem. Now that Taoist Shunchang knew that he had the land of creation essence in his hands, the other consciousness should also know about it. If he did not resolve this matter, then in the worst-case scenario he would not only have to deal with Taoist Shunchang, who was possessed by the evil consciousness, but he would also have to deal with the other treasure spirit that had manifested. On the surface, the best thing to do now was to help him suppress the other consciousness. Then he would be able to solve the problem smoothly. Even if there was an outsider, he would be the one to deal with it first. However, he did not respond immediately because there were too many things to think about. Seeing that he didn't answer, Shenlian guessed that he was weighing the pros and cons here. He said sincerely, "I know it's difficult for you, Taoist friend. I don't want to devour the essence of creation. I just want to borrow it for a while." He then said, "After I attain Tao, this treasure body has been shed. If you are willing to help me solve this problem, I am willing to give it to you as a token of appreciation." Zhang Yan was non-committal. According to Qing Sheng, as long as one had a treasure of fate, he would be invincible against his peers. Since he had said so, it was highly possible that he could even kill Chen Wanjun. However, Zhang Yan could tell that Qing Sheng and the others did not have much confidence in this and just wanted to give it a try. However, the matter of consciousness was the hardest to figure out. What if the consciousness of the person in front of him had already been restrained by the consciousness of the other side and was only using words to deceive him? Of course, it was also possible that he himself didn't know about it, but the problem here was even more serious. Now that its cultivation was inferior to the other consciousness, would it help the other consciousness to improve its cultivation after obtaining the essence of creation? There were simply too many variables in this situation. He had no interest in creating a powerful enemy after offering up the item. Even if the other party took out a supreme treasure, it would still be the same. In fact, if the other party wanted to tamper with it, even the supreme treasure itself wouldn't be trustworthy. Seeing that he did not speak for a long time, Taoist Sanyun said, "I wonder what fellow Taoist thinks?" Taoist Shunchang added, "You don't have to worry, fellow Taoist. The creation essence belongs to you after all. If you don't want to, we won't force you." Zhang Yan sternly said, "Forgive I for speaking bluntly, but in this matter, it is difficult to prove that what the two of them said is true with just words." Taoist Shunchang wasn't displeased by his words. Instead, he said, "You're right, fellow Taoist. It's only right to be cautious. We shouldn't rush to a conclusion. So, how do you think we should distinguish this matter?" Zhang Yan looked at the two of them and said, "I want to see the other one. Is that possible?" This Taoist Shunchang hesitated for a moment. "It's not impossible, but," Taoist Sun Yuan said, "Fellow Taoist, the two consciousnesses are constantly alternating. Fellow Taoist Shunchang doesn't know when the other one will come out. Moreover, every time it comes out, its strength increases a little." Zhang Yan looked at Shunchang and said, Will this one overwhelm you the next time it comes out? Shunchang thought about it carefully and said, although it improves every time, I can still suppress it. But if you want to see it, I'm afraid you'll have to wait for a long time. He also knew that he couldn't win Zhang Yan's trust with just a few words. Only by seeing the truth would he be able to convince him. However, he couldn't take the initiative to let the other consciousness occupy him, because the other consciousness's cultivation had suddenly increased a lot. This made it necessary for him to increase his cultivation as much as possible when he took control of the main body so that he wouldn't fall too far behind. Only then could he suppress this place and prevent it from escaping. Zhang Yan was very interested in the other consciousness. He wanted to see how it did all this and whether it was as he had guessed. He said, "It doesn't matter. I came here with an illusory body, so I can wait here." Seeing that he was willing to wait, Taoist Shunchang cupped his hands to Taoist Sanyan and said, "Fellow Taoist, please guard outside. Fellow Taoist Zhang and I can stay here." Taoist Sanyan also cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll take my leave first." Then, his figure turned dark and gradually disappeared. Zhang Yan felt that there was a dull and oppressive feeling in this world, but after Taoist Sanyuan left, it became relaxed again. He immediately understood that the presence of another deity refinement cultivator would put a lot of pressure on this world, so he wouldn't be able to stay for too long. Taoist Shunchang pointed his finger, and a palace appeared out of thin air. A lotus seat also appeared in front of Zhang Yan. He said, "Just now, I've been too busy talking. Please sit down and talk, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves and sat down, then began to talk with Taoist Shunchang. Taoist Shunchang's treasure spirit had manifested. Through this conversation, Meng Qi learned a lot about this generation's secrets. Now that he had returned, he didn't need to mention anything else. After an unknown period of time, Taoist Shunchang suddenly said in a serious tone, "He's coming soon. Fellow Taoist, you must be careful. If he comes out and makes some promises, fellow Taoist, you must not be deceived by his words." Zhang Yan felt that his qi was declining, so he knew that he was telling the truth. He said, "Rest assured, fellow Taoist. I will not act recklessly." Taoist Shunchang slowly lowered his head. Zhang Yan waited for a while before he noticed that his vital energy had suddenly become different. When he looked over once more, he noticed in a daze that he'd already transformed into a 7 or 8-year-old boy, but he'd already been replaced by another consciousness. However, this change in body shape was controlled by the mind, and it only took a thought. Meng Qi only needed to identify the person's qi to know who it was. It didn't matter what the person looked like. The boy's eyes were innocent and clear. He looked at Meng Qi with great curiosity and said, "Are you sent by my brother to deal with me?" Zhang Yan carefully analyzed and found that Taoist Shunchang had indeed changed his consciousness. If the previous one was reserved and had the demeanor of a gentleman, then this one was innocent and lively, just like a child. Moreover, the moment he opened his mouth, he called Taoist Shunchang as his brother. It seemed that the relationship between the two consciousnesses was not that simple. He smiled and said, "It is true that I was invited here, but I have not promised to deal with anyone yet." Taoist Shunchang was enlightened. "Is that so?" He then stood up and opened up his short arms. With anticipation, he asked, "Then can you help me get out of here?" Zhang Yan noticed that Taoist Shunchang was able to stand up, which meant that his cultivation level was much higher than Taoist Shunchang's. He smiled and said, "Although I did not promise anything, I am still a guest invited by your brother. Why should I help you get out of here?" Taoist Shunchang looked troubled as if he was trying to figure out how to convince him. Zhang Yan did not wait for him to speak and continued, "I am curious. You and my brother should have been cultivating at the same time, so why is your cultivation level higher?" Initially, he wanted to observe the mysteries of this on his own. However, after interacting with this person, he felt that if he were to ask directly, this person would most likely tell him the answer. As expected, Taoist Shunchang felt like he was being praised. He raised his head and said, "That is because I am walking on the right path." Zhang Yan asked again, "What is the right path?" Taoist Shunchang felt strange and said, "The right path is the right path." Zhang Yan thought about it for a while. Even though what Taoist Shunchang said seemed like he did not say it, but he understood something. The treasure spirits of creation were different from normal cultivators. As beings that were born with great Weili, they should be born with a Tao to follow, which was the so-called right path. However, the choice made by Taoist Shunchang was probably contrary to this. Taoist Shunchang was only following his heart. He knew how it was, but he did not know why. If he were to discuss Tao with him, he would not be able to get anything out of it. Therefore, he did not dwell on it and went back to the main topic. If you could get out of here, what would you do? Taoist Shunchang answered without hesitation, of course I would follow my heart. This time, the answer that Zhang Yan heard did not contain any truth, but he could understand the meaning behind it. It was not wrong to act according to one's heart, but if one did not know restraint, one would do whatever one wanted. If a person with a high level of mana and Tao were to act like this, it would be a disaster for both the person and oneself. However, Taoist Shunchang did not think that it was wrong. Instead, he thought that it was the right thing to do for just now. He continued, I heard that you have summoned a fellow cultivator to help you. Even if I did not do anything, you would still have a chance to get out of here. Taoist Shunchang bit his finger and said, but I did not summon him to help me get out of here. Zhang Yan smiled and said, oh? If that's not the case, then why did you call this person over? Taoist Shunchang answered seriously, I summoned him to eat him, of course. In this way, I can increase my Tao and get out of here earlier. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered a little. Although it was a short sentence, it revealed a lot of information. Taoist Shunchang could increase his Tao by devouring other treasures, but it was not known if it was a unique ability of him or if it was the same for all treasure spirits of creation. Another thing was that the two consciousnesses of Taoist Shunchang did not know each other. Taoist Shunchang could only vaguely feel the intention of the other consciousness, but he did not understand its real intention. The reason why Taoist Shunchang's Tao could be higher than the other consciousness was that he had already gained some benefits, or even devoured a treasure spirit. Chapter 1958. Zhang Yan suddenly realized that because of the two intents in one body, Shunchang Taoist might know what Shunchang Taoist knew as well. There were some things that Shunchang Taoist didn't want to talk about, but Shunchang Taoist didn't. He could take this opportunity to ask some questions. Thinking about this, he said, when I was talking with fellow Zhang Yan, I noticed that he was secretly worried, as if a disaster could come at any time. Do you know the reason? Shunchang Taoist asked curiously, didn't my brother tell you about this? Zhang Yan smiled and said, fellow Shunchang Taoist, we haven't known each other for a long time. What we talked about was all about Tao, but never about these things. Shunchang Taoist said proudly, I know. Zhang Yan saw him holding his head high as if to ask him questions, and he couldn't help but laugh. He was indeed innocent, but it was also because of this that if he was allowed to go out, just now would be the most terrifying. He said, then I have to ask. Shunchang Taoist said with a serious face, that is because there is a person in the void who doesn't exist yet. If he comes out, he will endanger our fellow Taoists. If we don't have someone to fight against him, we will be destroyed by him and fall into eternal silence. However, if there is no change in the void, then this person may not appear. The reason why fellow Zhang Yan is worried is that the change has already appeared, and the possibility of this person appearing has greatly increased. Zhang Yan was deep in thought. The so-called person who had yet to exist was not actually referring to the future, but rather that this person was bound to appear. Moreover, this person was already known by many in the same path. It was just that the opportunity had yet to arrive, so this person had yet to appear in front of others. As for the variable, it was very likely that it was referring to Bu Shutian, who was behind him. This was because the creation essence of this place was very unique, and even the Tai Ming ancestral master had left his mark there. Of course, this was only his conjecture, and there might be something he didn't know, so there was no need to ask. It didn't matter if this was the case or not, as long as the person hadn't appeared yet, there was still enough time to prepare. He asked again, if fellow Taoist is successful, how will you treat your brother? Boy Shunchang was confused and said, If I succeed, you will walk the righteous path with me. What else do you need? Zhang Yan immediately understood. Although the other party's consciousness was divided into self and brother, he did not feel that there was anything wrong with the contract between the two. Perhaps from the other party's point of view, swallowing priest Shunchang meant that he would be able to walk in the same place as himself. It did not matter whether priest Shunchang had an independent consciousness or not. He couldn't help but think that it was impossible to let Shunchang boy escape, but it wasn't necessarily a good thing to completely suppress Shunchang boy. It could be seen that Shunchang Taoist himself did not have much confidence in this matter. Therefore, after the two consciousnesses merged into one, there was no guarantee that the master would control the body. In the end, Shunchang Taoist consciousness would have the upper hand, and that would be very inappropriate. The only thing they could do now was to maintain the status quo and strike a balance between the two. Just now was the best. Seeing that he did not speak for a long time, boy Shunchang moved forward a little, raised his head and stared at him with his eyes wide open. Seeing him like this, Zhang Yan smiled and said, I wonder what kind of person fellow Taoist is summoning. Boy Shunchang bit his finger again, grunted and said, he looks a bit like Big Brother. Zhang Yan thought for a moment. What he meant was not that the person looked like priest Shunchang, but that both of them were transformed from the treasure spirit of creation. Therefore, they were similar in nature. It was even possible that the person was the same as priest Shunchang, a person who followed his own nature and pursued his own Tao. He asked again, then when will he come? Boy Shunchang shook his head and said, I don't know. I am only summoning him. Whether he comes or not, I have no control over it. Zhang Yan said, since he has not come, have you not thought of changing to another person? Boy Shunchang frowned and showed a distressed expression. He said, I can't find a suitable person. Zhang Yan asked a few more questions and understood that boy Shunchang could only find someone who had the same level of mana and cultivation as him. That way, it would be easier for Zhang Yan to devour. However, from another perspective, the person who could be summoned was naturally the most suitable. If the person's cultivation was too high, it would be difficult to deal with the person. Boy Shunchang suddenly twitched his mouth and said, Big Brother is coming out. Then, he sat down obediently and hugged his knees with his two little hands. After a while, the chi dynamic on his body changed again. As a ray of light flashed, he returned to his original appearance of priest Shunchang. However, he looked tired. He looked up at Zhang Yan and asked, Fellow Taoist, have you seen that person? Zhang Yan nodded and said, Yes, I have. How are you? He could see that the reason why priest Shunchang could replace boy Shunchang so quickly was because he had forcibly used the power of the seal that was set up beforehand. He was actually fighting against himself. Otherwise, with his endless mana, he would not have ended up like this. Priest Shunchang straightened out his chi dynamic and stood up. He bowed and said, Thank you for your concern. It's just a small trick. It won't be a big deal. Then, he looked up and said with some anticipation, Since you have seen that person, you should know that what I said is true. I wonder if you are willing to help me now? Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, I think that what you have thought is not a good choice. Priest Shunchang was startled, but he did not get angry. He raised his hand and asked seriously, May I ask why? When he discussed the Tao earlier, he'd noticed that even though Zhang Yan's cultivation was inferior to his, but because Zhang Yan's ability was obtained through his own cultivation and not a gift from the heavens, Zhang Yan's understanding of the Tao was much deeper and more thorough than his own in certain aspects. So she didn't dare disregard Zhang Yan's opinion. Zhang Yan mentioned some of the key points that he had considered. Other than the biggest problem of not having a clear consciousness, he was also unsure if Shunchang Taoist's enlightenment of Busu would bring about the advancement of Shunchang Taoist's cultivation. Priest Shunchang sighed. He had considered this before, but after discussing it with Priest Zhanyuan, he believed that boy Shunchang's cultivation would improve very quickly. As the advantage accumulated and expanded, he would eventually be unable to suppress him. This threat was right in front of him, so he had to take the risk. However, after listening to Zhang Yan's words, it seemed that there was another solution. He asked tentatively, Then what does fellow Taoist think? Zhang Yan said, I think that fellow Taoists should maintain the current situation and not overpower either side. Priest Shunchang said with a serious expression, "It's not that I don't want to, but that one's cultivation is already higher than mine. If I don't think of a solution in time, I'm afraid I won't be able to resist." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I think that fellow Taoist is worrying too much. That one's cultivation will not improve for no reason. After interacting with him, I believe that he swallowed a primordial treasure spirit. Now that he is still improving, it should be because he hasn't used up all his energy. When the energy is exhausted and he doesn't have a chance to swallow it, this situation will not happen again." Priest Shunchang was a little surprised. Then, he seemed to think of something and began to calculate. After a while, he sighed and said, "I see. I have overlooked this." After his explanation, Zhang Yan learned that after the good fortune essence shattered, not all of the treasure spirits were able to manifest. In fact, most of the treasure spirits didn't even have the chance to be born. They were only treasured embryos that became food for the treasure spirits that manifested. Shunchang Taoist had also obtained one in his early years, but he did not walk this path, so he only sealed it somewhere. Presumably, it was this one that was devoured by Shunchang Taoist. The reason why he did not think about it was because after he chose another path, he was afraid that he would unknowingly walk the same old path, so he covered up his memories of this matter. But now, with Zhang Yan's reminder, these thoughts resurfaced in his heart. He sighed and said, "I have been too careless. Just now I have given him a chance. If he really managed to escape, it would be a great sin." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, in order to stop that one from coming out, you did not hesitate to trap yourself. What is your sin? Now, fellow Taoist only needs to wait until that one's cultivation stops improving, then you can pass this trial." Priest Shunchang smiled bitterly and said, "But I'm afraid that I won't be able to hold on until then." Zhang Yan said, "If fellow Taoist can't suppress it by yourself, why don't you find someone to help?" Priest Shunchang said awkwardly, "This is very difficult to do. We can only rely on ourselves. If we ask for help from others, even if their mana comes, they may clash with each other. Even fellow Taoist Zhanyan can't stay in my peaceful world for long. Otherwise, that one wouldn't have had the chance to swallow the baby." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since I said so, I naturally have a solution." He opened his palm and called out in his heart. In a flash, the image of a dazzling golden pearl appeared out of thin air. This is the Tai Golden Pearl, and it was born from a place that contains the essence of creation. It can be said to be from the same source as fellow Taoist, yet it possesses boundless might, and it's even capable of carrying external forces. This humble Taoist can lend this treasure to fellow Taoist, and it doesn't matter whether fellow Taoist uses it to suppress or borrow its strength. Priest Shunchang was pleasantly surprised and said, "I've seen fellow Taoist use this treasure in battle, but I didn't know it was also born from the land of creation." Zhang Yan smiled. The Tai Golden Pearl's consciousness had long been erased by him, and it was also tainted by his aura. Unless it was someone who fought against him, it would be difficult to recognize it, and they would only think that it was refined from an ordinary creation fragment. He shook his sleeve and removed the shadow of the golden pearl. This was only a shadow, and without Priest Shunchang's permission, he could not summon this treasure into his body. Priest Shunchang was much more relaxed now. If he had this treasure to help him suppress it, then he could indeed hold on for a long time. A treasure refined from an ordinary creation fragment would be useless to him, but the Tai Golden Pearl was different. Fundamentally speaking, it was no different from him, but it could be of great help to him. Zhang Yan said, "The only variable now is the fellow Taoist that one summoned. At this moment, it is difficult to know whether he is a friend or a foe, and I don't know if he will come alone. To be safe, fellow Taoist should plan ahead." Chapter 1959. Zhang Yan thought that it would be easy to handle if there was only one person, but if there were two or more, it would not be so easy to deal with them. It was one thing for Shunchang Boy to swallow the precious fetus, which did not have any consciousness, but for those who were manifested by the treasure spirits, unless they were as pure and innocent as Shunchang Boy, who would come to them without knowing the situation. Logically speaking, he would definitely attract a few helpers to help him. Moreover, the other party might also want to swallow Shunchang boy. Taoist Shunchang was aware of the severity of the matter, which was why he had risked his life to try and suppress the other consciousness. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "If the person who is coming is powerful, would you be willing to help?" Zhang Yan did not hesitate and immediately replied, "I will help." In order to protect Bu Shutian, he also needed allies. Now that he almost knew the purpose of Xinchang and Zhangyun, it did not conflict with him, so he could join forces. If he did not do anything and caused Xinchang priest to fail or lose his consciousness, he would definitely be implicated because of Bu Shutian. Therefore, helping Xinchang was equivalent to helping himself. Xinchang priest was very happy to hear this. He raised his hand and said, "Thank you, Taoist friend." He thought for a moment and said solemnly, "This is not a small matter. I need to find Taoist friend Zhangyun to discuss it together." Zhang Yan had no objection. Taoist Shunchang immediately transmitted his divine will. After a while, Taoist Zhangyun returned to this place. But this time, he didn't need to bring anyone with him. In order to avoid clashing with Taoist Shunchang's magic power, he also transformed into a shadow and came here. When he appeared where the two were, he asked Shunchang priest, "How is the matter, Taoist friend?" Taoist Shunchang briefly explained what had happened. Taoist Zhangyun could not help but sigh. Zhang Yan's advice was indeed useful, but it did not really solve the problem. The consciousness left behind was still a hidden danger. Zhang Yan saw through his thoughts and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, you don't have to worry about this. We will eventually find a solution to this matter. At the very least, we don't have to take the risk now." In his opinion, as long as there were no more primordial treasure spirits being devoured by boy Shunchang, he would be able to stop the source of the primordial treasure spirits. As long as priest Shunchang maintained his cultivation and did not break the balance would be maintained indefinitely. Taoist Zhangyun slowly said, "What fellow Taoist said makes sense. We have to protect the present, and we can only look for a solution in the future." Zhang Yan saw that he still could not let it go. He thought for a while and said, "If you really can't get rid of that person, then you don't have to think about getting rid of it. You can wait until Shunchang Fellow's cultivation surpasses that person, then you can try to separate that person's consciousness." Taoist Zhangyuan's expression changed and he said, "Fellow Taoist, do you mean to find a body for that person?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Since we can't coexist, then we'll separate. I heard from Shunchang Fellow that there are still many creation treasured embryos wandering in the void. We can find one and use it as a sustenance." Of course, the premise was that Taoist Shunchang's cultivation could surpass boy Shunchang's. Otherwise, it would be hard to say who would be separated. Taoist Shunchang pondered for a long time and found that this method was very feasible. He sighed and said, "If we can't find a solution in the end, then this is the only way." Taoist Zhangyun also nodded. In any case, there was finally a way out. At this time, Taoist Shunchang bowed to them and said apologetically, "Thanks to your reminder this time, I didn't make a big mistake. I should have immediately offered this treasure to you, but I still need it to suppress that person, so I can't give it to you for the time being. Please forgive me, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I haven't solved your problem, so why do you need to do this? If we really solve this problem in the future, I won't refuse if you want to give it to me again." It seemed that he had gained nothing this time and even lent the Tai golden bead, but in fact, he had gained a lot from the Tao discussion. Moreover, the Tai golden bead was a Khanate supreme treasure. Because it had lost its consciousness, if he wanted to improve it, he would have to refine it repeatedly or fight against external forces. Now, it was equivalent to using Taoist Shunchang to do this, so strictly speaking, he was at an advantage. Taoist Shunchang said, "The most important thing now is to find a way to stop that person from coming," just as fellow Taoist Zhang said. Taoist Zhangyun said in a low voice, "I'm afraid that person is already here." Taoist Shunchang's expression froze and he said, "Did you find something?" Taoist Zhangyun said, "Just now, when I was guarding outside, I sensed a Dharma power spying on me. It was that person, but I drove him back." Taoist Shunchang said, if he can be driven away by you, then his Dharma power is below yours. Taoist Zhanyuan said in a deep voice, it would be best if he retreated and didn't dare to come again. Zhang Yan shook his head. He believed that this matter could not be pinned on the enemy's considerations. It could not be said that Taoist Zhanyuan's words were unreasonable. The other party might have come here with the intention of testing them, and it was obvious that they were on guard. If it were him, he would not take the risk of fighting with his peers if he did not have absolute confidence. After all, it was not like Su Ji had never manifested a treasure spirit before. But as long as there was a possibility that the other party would come to attack, they must not be careless. Taoist Shunchang pondered for a moment, and then said, there is one more thing that I wanted to discuss with fellow Taoist Zhang later. But given the current situation, I'm afraid I have to make it clear first. Zhang Yan said, if fellow Taoist has something to say, please say it. Taoist Shunchang said, I don't know if fellow Taoist has ever felt that in Su Ji, there will be a person who will invade and destroy all fellow Taoists. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I just now, when I was talking to someone, I happened to be told about this by him. Logically speaking, after he had discussed this matter with boy Shunchang, he should have sensed it. However, the strange thing was that he could not sense the existence of this person. He did not know whether it was because his cultivation was not complete or because of other reasons. Taoist Shunchang said in a low voice, since fellow Taoist understands, then there is no need for me to say more. Although this person has not shown himself, many fellow Taoists will not be as calm as before. Zhang Yan nodded. He could understand Taoist Shunchang's words. Previously, he did not know the existence of this person, so he could not see things clearly. But after understanding the situation, he was able to straighten it out. Because such a crisis could come at any time, spirit refinement cultivators would think of ways to improve their cultivation and strength in order to avoid being harmed by others. Previously, Ancestor Yao Han and the others had come to snatch Bu Su Tian time and time again. On one hand, it was because they coveted the treasure, and on the other hand, they were forced to do so, so they were not willing to give up. Another example would be those treasure spirits that had manifested. They would probably devour each other at a faster rate. It was hard to say if this was not the reason why Shunchang Boy could easily attract the attention of his peers. Moreover, it could be expected that there would only be more fights between peers. Taoist Shunchang continued, even if the three of us work together, we may not be able to protect ourselves under such a situation. Therefore, I have come up with a plan. If we can succeed, we might be able to avoid this disaster. What is it, fellow Taoist? Zhang Yan asked. Taoist Shunchang solemnly said, I want to combine the incomplete creations of the world and find a way to gather them together. Even if I cannot gather all of them, I want to gather half of them. That way, I will be able to fight against that person. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Taoist Shunchang was a person who sought after himself. Even if he were to change his path of cultivation, it would be useless. Hence, it was likely that he did not seek the fragment of good fortune for enlightenment, but for another purpose. Sure enough, Taoist Zhanyun explained on his behalf, fellow Taoist, please don't misunderstand. Fellow Taoist Shunchang didn't seek the good fortune fragment for the sake of studying Taoist techniques, but to use it to pave a way for him to survive. Zhang Yan thought that Bu Shutian could use it for protection, so he asked, could it be that you want to create a place where you will not be harmed? Taoist Shunchang nodded and said, yes. Taoist Zhanyun also said, since we don't seek external help, we've lost all the creation fragments that we've obtained. We hope that we can entrust them to the creation essence behind you. However, we don't know when the crisis will come. If we can't complete our task by then, would you allow us to enter and seek protection? Upon hearing this, Zhang Yan thought about it seriously. The request of these two was somewhat similar to Qing Sheng's. However, Bu Shutian had a master and disciples of the same sect in the present world. Before he could truly control the place where the creation essence was, he would not allow any of his peers to enter. He said, I cannot agree to your request now. When the time comes, I will give you a clear answer. Taoist Shunchang said, it is not an easy task to collect the creation fragments, and we do not know if we can do it. It is not too late to discuss this matter later. While the three of them were discussing, a person in a colorful robe stood in the void, looking at the place where Taoist Shunchang had created. His mana was firmly restrained within his body, and not a single strand of it was leaked out. His fluttering Taoist robe was empty, as if there was nothing inside it. Only his eyes shone brightly, as if they were real stars. At this moment, he heard a voice in his ear. Was Taoist friend summoned by the person in here? Taoist Shunchang said, yes. His Qi-ji is hindered, and he must be under some kind of restriction. That voice said, could it be that a fellow Taoist deliberately lured you here? The bright-robed Taoist said, I have also considered this before. However, just now, a little bit of my mana leaked out and was blocked by another person. If it was a trap, he wouldn't have done such a thing. Hence, I deduced that he should be sealed here by someone. This kind of opportunity doesn't come often. That voice said, since he was able to block it, his mana must be above Taoist friends. Taoist Shunchang said, therefore, I need Taoist friends' help. That voice said, I am unable to leave now, but Taoist friend can follow my mana to find a fellow Taoist. This person has received a favor from me in the past, and should be able to help you. Chapter 1960. Although Taoist Shunchang's plan did not receive a clear response from Zhang Yan, the latter did not reject him outright. In order to make this matter as real as possible, he raised his hand, and a bright light shone in his palm. He said, this is a fragment of good fortune. I will leave it with you for now. Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then he waved his sleeve and kept it. He said, I can keep it for you. If fate allows it, it will fulfill your wish. If not, I will return it. Now he was cultivating the path of seeking self while observing the path of Bu Su Tian. His cultivation was improving very quickly, but he did not care about this fragment. After he brought it back to his original place, he would put it in Bu Su Tian. At that time, as long as he guarded the door, he would not be afraid of others taking it away. Taoist Shunchang relaxed when he saw him keep the fragment. He cupped his hands and said, then I will leave it to you. Zhang Yan said, if you want to find the fragment of good fortune, you will definitely have a conflict with others. Do you have a detailed plan? Taoist Zhang Yan said, before Taoist Shunchang can get rid of that person, we are not going to make things difficult for you. Apart from the fragments in the hands of others, there are still many fragments of the essence of good fortune left in the void. It is better to find them here first. Zhang Yan nodded. It was indeed not a good time to have a conflict with others. However, the fragments of the essence of good fortune were very difficult to find. Those that fell in the present world would disappear in a flash if not invaded by the spirit refinement Weili. If they were not taken out, they would disappear together with the river of the present world when it collapsed. Although such things would not really disappear and would eventually appear again, no one would know where they would fall. Therefore, whether one could find them or not depended entirely on one's luck. Shunchang Taoist then said, I know of a world-seizing place. It was originally built by a friend of mine. After the creation essence was destroyed, he disappeared along with his friends. It's hard to say if he has fallen into eternal silence. However, at that time, I saw a creation spiritual light fall into the world-seizing place, and there should be a fragment left in it. I had no intention of disturbing this place in the past, but now I've gone to retrieve it. Speaking of this, he sighed and said, but doing so is very likely to lead to the collapse of this place. I am very sorry. Taoist Zhang Yan comforted him. Taoist friend, the disaster is coming. Even if we do not move, that place may be targeted. It is better for us to take out the fragment as soon as possible. Taoist Shunchang nodded and looked at Zhang Yan, but I still have to trouble you here. Zhang Yan said, what do you need I to do? Taoist Shunchang said, the place has no owner, so we can break in from the outside. If everything goes well, we only need to open the door and use our magic power to invade it in an instant, then we can take out the essence of good fortune. But I am worried that the Taoist friend might have left behind some arrangements. If others find out, I am afraid that more variables will appear out of thin air. I hope that you and Taoist Zhang Yuan can go together and take out the fragment. Zhang Yan understood his worries. If they were to be careless and be noticed by the other spirit refinement cultivators, then under the current situation, it would most likely cause an intense battle, and this was precisely what they needed to avoid right now. He thought for a moment. Although it was a place that was called the world of good fortune, there was nothing wrong with just entering it with his consciousness. Therefore, he said, "I agree." Taoist Shunchang was about to thank him, but suddenly he frowned. Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes. Just now, he felt an inexplicable feeling, but soon it disappeared. He still didn't know why, but it appeared at this time, and it was very likely that it had something to do with the world of good fortune. Taoist Zhan Yuan's expression became solemn. He said, "This seems to be a sign of danger." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "It's not necessarily a sign of danger. Moreover, if it really has something to do with the world of good fortune, we can't avoid it." Taoist Shunchang agreed with him and said, "Taoist Zhang is right. This feeling is vague, and it is difficult to know where it is pointing. It is useless to avoid it. We don't need to be frightened by it. It is better to stick to our original plan." After the three of them discussed, they decided to act immediately to avoid too many variables. Taoist Shunchang pointed, and a spiritual light spread out in front of him. He said, "The two of you will find the world of good fortune if you follow this path." Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and walked forward. He felt his body sink. When he looked up again, he found a stagnant world of good fortune in front of him. But compared to Taoist Shunchang's world of good fortune, it was much dimmer. At this time, Taoist Zhan Yuan appeared beside him. He also looked at the world of good fortune and said, "Taoist friend, it should be here. But there is no one guarding this place. If the door is open, I am afraid it will collapse if we are not careful. We need to be careful later." Zhang Yan said yes. Taoist Zhan Yuan looked at it. After a moment, he saw the world of good fortune, which had been frozen and motionless, ripple like flowing water. This movement was equivalent to opening the door. But when the originally immutable thing changed, the long river of the world of good fortune began to flow. Since then, there had been ups and downs. If no one stopped it, it would not be far from death. The two of them instantly entered the world of good fortune and created two avatars. They joined hands and released their magic power in an attempt to occupy the world of good fortune. Once they succeeded, as long as there was a fragment of good fortune in this place, they could take it away. However, at this moment, the two of them felt that their mana was obstructed. It was another external force that was obstructing them. This should be the result of Ding Shi opening the door. Another god refinement force shone over and then turned into a doppelganger in this place. But there were two of them here. As long as the other party was not here, it would not be difficult to suppress it. With the two of them working together, it did not take long for them to expel that wisp of consciousness. At this moment, Taoist Zhan Yuan sensed it and reached out to grab it. A moment later, a bright ball of light appeared in his palm. He had successfully found the fragment of good fortune. He handed it to Zhang Yan and said, "I'll leave it to you, Taoist friend." Zhang Yan took it and found that this fragment was slightly different from the ones he had seen before. It seemed to be clearer. He thought for a moment and understood that the fragments of good fortune had experienced many worlds of good fortune. According to Taoist Shunchang, this fragment had fallen here after the collapse of the essence of good fortune. It had not floated in other worlds of good fortune, so it could not be more pure. After obtaining this item, the two of them did not linger and retreated from the world of good fortune. Then, the world of good fortune gradually dimmed and soon dissipated into the void. When Taoist Zhan Yuan saw this, he could not help but sigh and said, "It seems that this Taoist friend is really not here anymore." As long as a spirit refinement cultivator was in the void, then this world of good fortune would have a consciousness and could be maintained. But now that it was gone, it was likely that the person had entered eternal silence. Zhang Yan watched quietly and did not say anything. If he had been able to comprehend the essence of good fortune on that day, the world of good fortune would have benefited greatly. It was just that he had not achieved his goal in the end. Since he had done this, he must have considered the consequences long ago. Seeing that this matter was over, he temporarily bid farewell to Taoist Zhan Yuan and returned his consciousness to his body. At the same time, he also brought back the 2 fragments and threw them into Bushutian with a flick of his sleeve. On the other side, Ancestor Yao Han and the other 2 were also searching for the fragments of good fortune. All of a sudden, they sensed a mysterious aura approaching them. Closely following that, they sensed an uncontrollable force approaching them. Taoist Yu Qiu said vigilantly, "There is an outsider here." Ancestor Yao Han said, "Don't be alarmed, the newcomer has no ill intentions. The first aura came from someone I know. Perhaps he needs my help with something which led him here." Taoist Yu Lu said in a deep voice, "Based on that aura, this person is a treasure spirit." When spirit refinement cultivator's magic power clashed, many things could not be concealed, and he could immediately see through the other party's background. Taoist Yu Qiu frowned and said, "Fellow Taoist Yao Han, the creation treasure spirit is not on the same side as me." Ancestor Yao Han said, "Let's talk after we meet this person." Even though he said so, he did not let down his guard and stared at the source of the magic power. A moment later, the 3 saw a Taoist dressed in resplendent clothes appear in front of them. He bowed to them and said, "I am Yi Han." He looked at Ancestor Yao Han and said, "This must be fellow Taoist Yao Han. Fellow Taoist once owed a favor to a fellow Taoist." Ancestor Yao Han bowed back and said, "Of course I remember." Taoist Yi Han said, "Then please follow me to a place. Regardless of success or failure, the favor will be repaid." Ancestor Yao Han stood still and asked, "What is it?" In the spirit refinement realm, any oaths were useless. Even though he owed a favor, he did not have to repay it. Taoist Yi Han said, "I have a fellow Taoist trapped in a stopped world, and I need to help him escape. Coincidentally, there is someone guarding that place, and I can't defeat him, so I need your help." Ancestor Yao Han did not reply and looked at Taoist Yu Lu and said, "What do you think, fellow Taoist?" Taoist Yu Lu performed a hand seal and calculated, then frowned and said, "This matter seems to be related to that Taoist Zhang. Fellow Taoist, you need to be careful." Ancestor Yao Han's expression sank. After thinking for a moment, he bowed and said, "Forgive me for not being able to help fellow Taoist, but I advise fellow Taoist not to go." Taoist Yi Han asked curiously, "Why is that?" Ancestor Yao Han said, "This involves an opponent of ours. Although his cultivation isn't as high as ours, his magic power is extremely strong. The 3 of us have fought him several times, but we haven't been able to gain the upper hand. This matter is likely to involve someone else, so even if I go, it will be useless." Taoist Yi Han was surprised. If that was the case, he would have to think about it carefully. Ancestor Yao Han then said, "Moreover, it is not just one person. There is a Taoist who claims to be from Changqing Xizing, and he seems to have made some sort of agreement with him. This person's magic power and cultivation are both above ours, and he took away all our artifacts. If we provoke him, we will not be able to resist him." Changqing Xizing? Taoist Yi Han showed a serious expression for the first time. "Azure Sage?" He said to Ancestor Yao Han, "Thank you for telling me, fellow Taoist. However, I must obtain this matter. Once I have made the necessary preparations, I will come to you again." "I hope you will not refuse then." Chapter 1961. Taoist Yu Qiu watched as Yi Han left. He pondered for a moment and said, "It seems like he hasn't changed his mind. If he comes again, will you really go and help him?" Patriarch Yao Han waved his hand and said, "It's fine if he's only looking for trouble with Taoist Zhang. But now that he's involved in a battle between the treasure spirits, why should I get involved?" He was prepared to return the favor, but there was a difference in the size of the matter. If it did not benefit him much and might even bring him more trouble, he would definitely not do it. Taoist Yu Qiu agreed, "That's a wise decision." The 3 of them could be said to have advanced and retreated together. If Patriarch Yao Han was involved, the 2 of them would not be able to escape. Previously, Azure Sage had easily taken away their treasures. If Azure Sage were to appear again, they knew that they would not be his match. Taoist Yu Lu said, "This person who calls himself Yi Han seems to be very confident. The treasure spirits of creation always have some unpredictable tricks up their sleeves. Let's let him fight with Taoist Zhang for a while, and then we'll find an opportunity to act. After Zhang Yan threw the 2 fragments of the essence of creation into Bu Su Tian, he waved his sleeve, and a golden light shot out. It was the Tai golden bead that was sent to where Taoist Zhanyuan was. Taoist Shunchang was unable to leave, and without anyone to guide him, his mana could not get close to that place. Therefore, he could only rely on Taoist Zhanyuan to pass it on to him. At this moment, he thought of the inexplicable feeling from before. Nothing happened until he obtained the fragments of creation, but he did not ignore it. Something that could appear in his heart would not be that simple. Even if it did not appear in front of him, something would definitely happen in the future. Fortunately, his cultivation was improving rapidly, and he was becoming more powerful with every passing moment. The later the feeling came, the more he would be able to deal with it. He straightened his mind and continued to comprehend the Tao in Bu Su Tian. However, this time, as soon as his consciousness sank into it, he felt the truth of the grand Tao shine into his body. He immediately knew that this was caused by the 2 good fortune fragments. This caused him to be slightly surprised. Originally, he wouldn't waste these 2 items that were placed here. It was just that 1 or 2 of them weren't of much use to him right now, so he was prepared to deal with them together in the future when there were more of them. However, he didn't expect that they would take the initiative to fuse with his consciousness. If there was no accident, this was caused by Bu Su Tian. Compared to Bu Shu Tian, these 2 fragments were like small boats in the ocean. After they sank into this space, they could only follow the current. Thus, when his consciousness stirred Bu Shu Tian, he was also drawn into it. He thought for a moment. Although this was not a bad thing, it was best if he could control Bu Su Tian. Fortunately, regardless of whether it was Bu Shu Tian or the good fortune fragment, as long as his consciousness didn't accept it, the great Tao wouldn't shine on him. So, as long as he knew what to do, a similar situation wouldn't happen again. Fortunately, whether it was Bu Su Tian or the fragment of creation, as long as his consciousness did not accept it, the truth of the Tao would not shine over. Thus, as long as he knew what to do, a similar situation would not occur again. While he was thinking, the jade plate beside him suddenly emitted light. However, it only flashed for a moment before dimming again. Seeing that this was the case, he didn't pay much attention to it. After all, this thing was by his side, so whatever mysteries were hidden within it would gradually be revealed as time passed. Inside Songqing meditation, Azure Saint was looking at the worlds to find the existence of the fragment of creation. There was nothing clever about this, and it all depended on one's luck. In fact, for a powerful being like him, if he focused all his attention on the search, he would find something after a long time. However, he was so patient now because that existence had not appeared yet. If danger came, he would not sit here and would go out to snatch it. However, at that time, even if he did not look for others, others would come looking for him. Just as his mind was wandering through the thousands of realms, suddenly, a wave of mana rushed in. Although it couldn't affect him, it made it impossible for him to clearly see the changes in each realm. It was obvious that someone was disturbing him. He could not help but have a cold expression. He calculated for a moment and snorted. Immediately, an incarnation appeared in the void and followed the mana. Soon, it came in front of a Taoist in bright clothes. The Taoist bowed to him and said, "Fellow Taoist, you are finally here." Qing Sheng was displeased. "Han, what are you trying to do? I am not in the mood to deal with you now, but if you insist on making things difficult for me, I will not let you off easily." Taoist Han said, "Fellow Taoist, don't be angry. I am only here to confirm one thing. If it has nothing to do with you, I will leave and not disturb you again." Azure Saint did not want to really fall out with him, so he said coldly, "What is it?" Taoist Han said, "Do you know Taoist Zhang?" Hearing this, Taoist Qing Sheng stared at him and said, "Why, do you want to deal with this person?" Taoist Han said, "I have no grudges with this person. Recently, I found a fellow Taoist who was restrained and I want to free him. A fellow Taoist has deduced that this Taoist Zhang may be related to this matter." Taoist Qing Sheng changed his mind and said coldly, This person has nothing to do with me. No matter what you want to do, it has nothing to do with me. In the future, do not bother me with such things. If I see you disturbing me again, I will not be polite. Taoist Yi Han looked at him and said, "All right, I hope that fellow Taoist will not interfere. Farewell." He bowed and disappeared in a flash. Taoist Qing Sheng also changed his mind and retreated his incarnation, thinking about whether he could make use of this matter. The reason why he did not use forceful methods to snatch Bu Su Tian was that Zhang Yan had helpers at that time. Secondly, he was afraid that Zhang Yan would rather close Bu Su Tian's door than let him in. On the other hand, if Zhang Yan was fighting for it with someone else and it was only a small matter, then Chen Shi would naturally not lend a hand. However, if there was a possibility that the place that contained the essence of creation could be seized, then he would naturally not allow that to happen. As for his promise to Taoist Yi Han not to interfere, he did not take it to heart. He and Taoist Yi Han were enemies, so a few casual words did not count. After Taoist Yi Han and Azure Saint parted ways, he appeared outside of Taoist Shenchang's world of tranquility. This time, he came alone and did not try to rope in Patriarch Yao Han and the other two Taoists. This was because he could see that they had no intention of helping him. If he forced them, he might fall out with them. Even if he did not have anyone to help him, he was well prepared. He was the manifestation of a treasure spirit and was born with a treasure of good fortune. Apart from that, he had borrowed another one from his friends. With the advantage of two treasures of good fortune, he was confident that he could fight the enemy. If he couldn't, he would think of another way. At this moment, he did not have the intention to attack directly. Instead, he was secretly observing the world of tranquility, trying to find a suitable opportunity to enter. After Taoist Shunchang received the Taiyi golden pearl from Zhang Yan, he used it to strengthen the seal. This way, even if the other consciousness had a higher cultivation than him, it would not be able to break free. Fortunately, not long after, he relaxed. Although the other consciousness's cultivation was still improving, it was far from its previous momentum. Moreover, it was gradually slowing down. If this continued, it would become stagnant sooner or later. He pondered and said, "It seems that Taoist Zhang's judgment is correct. That person's cultivation must have improved because he swallowed the precious embryo. Now, he is almost exhausted." This was good news for him. For those who sought external help, the improvement of their attainment almost had to rely on the essence of creation. However, he had achieved the path of seeking himself. As long as he poured his will into the body, his attainment would be improved. While the other consciousness was stagnant, he could slowly improve. If this continued, it would not take long before his attainment would surpass the other consciousness. As he expected, because Shenchang Boy's cultivation was higher and he had occupied the body for a longer time, Taoist Zhan Yuan could only use the power of the seal to balance it. However, as his cultivation improved, the situation gradually reversed. Taoist Zhan Yuan was now in charge of protecting him. Whenever Shenchang Boy appeared, he would come to take charge. Seeing this, Taoist Zhan Yuan felt much more at ease. However, after the two consciousnesses alternated dozens of times, Taoist Zhan Yuan came again, but his expression changed slightly. He saw Shenchang Boy standing there, looking up at Su Ji. Taoist Zhan Yuan's heart sank. Logically speaking, it was not time yet, but this person had appeared. It was hard to know if something had happened. He asked tentatively, "What are you looking at?" Shenchang Boy bit his finger and stared up. "That person is here." Taoist Zhan Yuan frowned and asked, "Who?" Shenchang Boy said, "The person I called last time." Taoist Zhan Yuan was shocked. If what Shenchang Boy said was true, that the enemy was already in front of his door, but he had not felt anything until now, then the enemy must have used some method to conceal himself. He immediately took out a spell. This was a backup plan left behind by the Shenchang Taoist. He could use the power of the seal to suppress the consciousness of the Shenchang Taoist. Then the Shenchang Taoist consciousness would come out and he would be able to fight his enemy freely. But after he did this, he suddenly found that it was useless. Shenchang Boy was still standing there. Taoist Zhan Yuan had a bad feeling. Before he could think of another way, A red ray of light shot in from outside and landed on the world stopper. Instantly, an entrance was forcibly torn open in this space. Then, a majestic spiritual power invaded inside. Zhang Yan was in the middle of the tincture when he suddenly sensed that something was wrong outside. He sensed that Taoist Zhan Yuan's magic power had suddenly fluctuated violently, which meant that he was fighting with someone. Zhang Yan immediately opened his eyes and looked around. He saw a Taoist in splendid clothes rushing to Shunchang Boy's tincture. Taoist Zhan Yuan was confronting him with a golden bell in his hand. With a shake of the bell, Shunchang Boy's magic power weakened a little. Taoist Zhan Yuan's magic power was obviously higher, but under the influence of the bell, his magic power was constantly weakened. It seemed that he would not be able to hold on for long. Chapter 1962. Zhang Yan had previously promised Taoist Shunchang that he would block the intruder when he was sealed. Now that this had happened, he certainly would not sit back and watch. He shifted his gaze to the Taoist in bright clothes. If there was no accident, this person should be the one who had come to spy on him previously and was later forced to retreat by Taoist Zhan Yuan's mana. This time, he dared to come alone, but he did not see any helpers, so he should have something to rely on. He stared at the golden bell for a moment and saw that there was a thin layer of smoke-like dense light lingering on its surface, as if it would slip away from his senses at all times. This was undoubtedly a supreme treasure of fortune. Judging from the aura, this person should be the manifestation of the treasure spirit. The last time he came, this treasure should have been with him if it was formed by symbiosis with him. However, he did not take it out and use it at that time. It was either because he was not confident at that time, or he had hidden more powerful means that he had not used yet. When he thought of this, he changed his mind and split into a shadow, which directly shone into the world. Since his cultivation had not passed the stage of enlightenment, he should not have been able to come here. However, the Tai golden bead was borrowed by Taoist Shunchang and used as the sealing force of this place, so there was a connection between them. This was equivalent to pointing him in the right direction, so he was able to find his way here. However, it was only a shadow that could reach this place. Due to the resistance and rejection of each other's mana, the real body still could not directly pass through. Originally, he wanted to come here to meet Taoist Shunchang and discuss the situation, but when he arrived here, he was surprised to find that the one occupying his body was not Jingyan, but Shunchang Boy. His thoughts turned and he glanced outside. This person should have seen a treasure spirit coming from the outside, so he turned around and showed himself. If this was the case, then the reason why Taoist Shunchang could successfully suppress the other consciousness in the past was not as he had thought, but because Shunchang Boy himself was willing to retreat. He had once thought about how two consciousnesses could coexist. According to his understanding, when one consciousness appeared, the other consciousness was not completely unaware, and could even connect to the outside world to a certain extent. Otherwise, Taoist Shunchang would not have been able to use the power of the seal to force his way out. But now, he did not have the slightest intention of using the power of the seal, as if there was no trace of him. This was either because his consciousness had fallen into a muddled state, or because he had been suppressed to the point that he could not use the power of the outside world. This situation was probably because Shunchang Boy's consciousness was pure. When a goal emerged in his heart, there was no room for any other distracting thoughts, including Taoist Shunchang's consciousness. Thinking of this, he looked at the seal again and found that at this moment, because there was no one presiding over it, the power of the seal was dissipating bit by bit. Shunchang Boy was trying to break through it, but after a deeper inspection, he was relieved. Now, in addition to Taoist Shunchang's own treasured clothes, there was also the Tai golden bead suppressing above, and it had fallen on the joints. With the two superimposed, the power could be said to be doubled. Even Taoist Shunchang himself would not be able to break out without the help of others. This should be a trick that he had set up to prevent accidents, and he did not expect it to work. He turned his eyes and said to Shunchang Boy, "Taoist friend, you can't get out." Shunchang Boy pointed outside and said, "But that person can come in." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "With Taoist friend Zhan Yun here, I am afraid it will be difficult for him to come in." Although the person has a treasure of fortune, he may not be able to defeat him. Shen Changboy said loudly, "There is more than one." He raised his fists high above his head and said seriously, "There are two." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. It was difficult for an outsider to know the connection between treasure spirits, and that person was originally summoned by Shen Changboy. If he said that this person had two treasures of fortune, then it was probably true. This also explained why this person dared to come here alone. Taoist Zhang had been fighting with the person until now, and he had also seen some clues. If the golden bell could shake continuously, Taoist Zhang would have been defeated long ago. However, it only shook after a while. This should be because he couldn't control this treasure freely. This undoubtedly showed that this object wasn't a magic treasure that he was most proficient in. Although Taoist Zhang was at a disadvantage, he did not ask for help, which meant that he had some tricks up his sleeves. He thought for a while but did not rashly join the battle. At this moment, Taoist Zhang was completely on the defensive as his opponent advanced step by step. But he could not be blamed for not trying his best. Every time his magic power seemed to surpass his opponent would shake the golden bell and make all his efforts go to waste. Fortunately, his strength was actually much higher than his opponent's, so even if his magic power was returned, he could immediately make deductions and increase the level of his magic power, which was enough to maintain the situation. This was actually very disadvantageous for him, because in the battle of spirit refinement, one had to fight purely with magic power. Therefore, the level of magic power one could increase was enough to determine who was stronger. Now that he was repeatedly obstructed while doing this, it was tantamount to making no progress, while his opponent's magic power was increasing layer by layer. It was not very obvious who was stronger now, but once the gap was further widened, his opponent could take advantage of this advantage to crush him in one fell swoop. He knew that he could not stop this under the preconditions, but he was not completely helpless. Due to the limitations of his cultivation, it was impossible for his opponent to increase the level of his magic power in one go. He could only slowly push it to the peak that he could reach, and then burst it out in one go. This meant that his opponent had almost no way to worry about anything else at that time. As long as he could block the attack and then take advantage of the situation to counterattack, he could take advantage of his opponent's unfamiliarity with magic weapons and take back the initiative. In order to achieve this, he must rely on magic weapons. Even though he was someone who sought help from himself, he was a Tao protector, so he'd refine this treasure as well. However, since the battle began until now, he'd been restraining himself because he was waiting for an opportunity to turn defeat into victory. At this moment, Taoist Yi Han's attack was very smooth. He had thought that he would at least have to face two opponents after arriving, but now that the battle had reached this point, he could not help but feel a little surprised that no one had come to help him. However, there was always a vague sense of crisis lingering in his heart. After thinking for a while, he decided that it would be better to take down the person in front of him as soon as possible. Then, it would be much easier to deal with other people if they came. Therefore, with a thought, he sped up the deduction of his magic power. Soon, his magic power rose to an unprecedented level. At this moment, without the slightest hesitation, he exerted all his strength and pushed it toward his opponent. When Taoist Zhang saw this, he shook his sleeve and saw a white jade person fly out. The person had a delicate face, complete facial features, and wore a Taoist robe on top of her head. She looked somewhat similar to Taoist Zhang. When Taoist Yi Han's magic power surged up, the jade person only trembled, and fine cracks appeared on her body. However, in the blink of an eye, the cracks were completely healed. Yi Han frowned. He had hoped to overwhelm his opponent in one go, but he did not expect that his attack would be blocked. He snorted, and with a thought, the golden bell suddenly shook, and the jade person trembled. Then, they gradually turned illusory and showed signs of returning to the good fortune fragment. Taoist Zhang did not care about this at all. Taking advantage of the fact that the jade person had attracted all the pressure, he immediately calculated. Relying on his profound cultivation, his magic power suddenly increased, and in the blink of an eye, he leaped to a level where he was almost in a stalemate with Taoist Yi Han. When Taoist Yi Han saw that the advantage he had fought for just now was gone, and that the situation had almost returned to the beginning of the battle, he could not help but feel a little irritated. A treasure spirit of good fortune like him was not like a Taoist cultivator, who first got rid of distracting thoughts and then cultivated step by step in order to obtain the fruit of the way. Instead, he was born with great Weili, so his mood was often easily changed. Just as his state of mind was in turmoil, he suddenly felt a tyrannical magic power suddenly attack him. This magic power originally existed in the void, but it suddenly rose without any warning, which made his heart tremble. Fortunately, he was prepared to face a few opponents this time, so he'd always maintained a trace of vigilance in his heart. Now he didn't panic. With a thought, a dazzling light flashed on his body, and an exquisite crystal cup floated up. With a shake, all the magic energy vanished without a trace, and it was as if it had never appeared before. When Taoist Zhang Yuan noticed this change, he knew that Zhang Yan had attacked him from behind. His spirits were lifted. Although he had not asked for help, it was undoubtedly good news that Zhang Yan had taken the initiative to attack. Moreover, this time, Zhang Yan's attack was also at the right time, forcing the other hidden treasure out. Taoist Zhang Yuan did not miss this opportunity and immediately pressed forward. Taoist Yi Han hurriedly shook the golden bell and weakened the magic power that was attacking him. Although he had a magic treasure, he was not at a disadvantage, and it could even be said that he could still gain the upper hand if given some time. However, being suppressed like this, his spirit was frustrated, and the battle was no longer as fierce as just now. Just now, Zhang Yan was only controlling the magic power from afar and did not show himself. However, after this move, it was not difficult for Taoist Yi Han to see that the Jade Cup should be his opponent's magic treasure, which could swallow the magic power that was attacking him. If he did not get rid of this thing, it would be useless even if he joined the battle. He thought for a moment and prepared to try a method that he had never used before. When he was in the True Yang stage, he could borrow Bu Su Tian's power, but that was only in the present world. After reaching the refined God stage, perhaps because he had transcended from the present world, there was a barrier between the two, and he could no longer use it. He originally thought that perhaps he would have to wait until he controlled Bu Su Tian to be able to do this. But as he continued to sink into the depths of Bu Su Tian's comprehension, he found that he did not need to do this to borrow a part of the Weili. Bu Su Tian was the essence of creation, so even if he could only borrow a little, it was still a great Weili. With this thought in mind, he immediately sank his mind into it, and with a move of his consciousness, a vast power was drawn out. Chapter 1963. Although Zhang Yan's Fa Li had been absorbed by the Jade Cup, with just this one contact, he had more or less seen through the strengths and weaknesses of this object. Logically speaking, if this treasure was so powerful, wouldn't Taoist Yi Han have already taken it out and suppressed Taoist Zhang Yuan? But if he hadn't made a move, Taoist Yi Han might have hidden until the end. The real reason was that this treasure could only deal with one person's magic power at a time. This was highly possible. Otherwise, when he dissipated the attacking magic power, he could have dissipated Taoist Zhang Yuan's magic power as well. The reason he did not move before was probably because he wanted to save his magic power to deal with unexpected situations. Since it had such a flaw, it wouldn't be difficult to defeat the enemy as long as it targeted this weakness. These thoughts flashed through his mind. At this time, Bu Su Tian's Weili became thicker and thicker under the guidance of his mind. When he felt that his mind had reached its limit, he pushed it toward Taoist Yi Han. To prevent his efforts from being easily absorbed by the Jade Cup, he also stimulated his magic power and pressed it down. Taoist Yi Han was trying to regain the upper hand from Taoist Zhang Yuan, but he didn't ignore the magic power that was attacking him just now. At this moment, he suddenly felt two Weili attacks coming at him. His expression changed, thinking that another person was coming. He'd already seen one of them before, and it was the person who'd clashed with him earlier. However, he couldn't determine the origins of the other mighty force, but it gave him a feeling that it was vast and unstoppable. It was even to the extent that there was an indescribable power within it, causing him to feel a sense of fear that returned to his original self for no reason. He instinctively had a feeling that he absolutely couldn't allow this power to strike him. He hurriedly shook the golden bell to drive back Taoist Zhang Yuan's attack. Then he mobilized all the magic power in his body and collided with Bu Shutian's Weili. At the same time, he took out the jade cup and absorbed all the magic power sent by Zhang Yan. Upon seeing this, Taoist Zhang Yuan didn't persist in raising his magic power. Instead, he seized the opportunity and rushed forward. Because Taoist Yi Han had done his best to deal with Zhang Yan's attack, he could no longer block Zhang Yan's attack. Therefore, Zhang Yan's attack this time was extremely smooth, and the waves of mana crashed into him. Taoist Yi Han's clothes suddenly flashed, and in the blink of an eye, most of the external force that surged up was eliminated. The Taoist robe he was wearing was not shed by a treasure spirit, but was refined from a good fortune fragment. Normally, it was used to restrain his magic power, and in times of danger, it could also be used to block the magic power of others of the same generation. Now that he had this item, just now he was able to get through it. But even so, when he was hit by it, his chi was weakened. If the mana released by a spirit refinement cultivator was suppressed to the extreme and continued to be suppressed by the opponent, it would be very difficult for it to spread out. It would only be able to keep itself from collapsing, it wouldn't even be able to move outwards. This was equivalent to losing everything. But this wasn't the worst. If even this couldn't be maintained, then it would fall into eternal silence. But this situation was rare. Although he hadn't reached this step yet, the situation was very bad. He realized that his opponent was much more powerful than he had expected, and he knew that he might not be able to deal with it alone. But he was not willing to retreat just like that. With a thought, a phantom was sent out, and in the blink of an eye, it arrived at the place where Ancestor Yao Han and the others were cultivating. Ancestor Yao Han and the others noticed that he had come again, but they didn't avoid him. Instead, they cupped their fists and greeted him. Taoist Yi Han said in a deep voice, "The last time I came, I already explained the situation. Now, I'm fighting with this generation. The Taoist Zhang that you mentioned is also among them, and it's difficult for me to defeat him alone. I hope that you can help me, and I'll repay you later." Ancestor Yao Han sighed. "I'm afraid we won't be able to do as you wish. That place is the world-stabilizing realm. We can sense what you're talking about, but we can't see it. Our mana is far inferior to this person's, and I'm afraid we won't be able to reach that place." Taoist Yi Han was a little displeased. Previously, he didn't want to force Ancestor Yao Han and the others, but that was because he believed that he had a way to deal with the enemy. But after the battle, he ran into a wall, so he wouldn't allow Taoist Yi Han to refuse. He said, "I have the guidance of a fellow Taoist, and I can lend it to you. It won't be difficult for you to reach that place. Besides, you don't need to enter the world-stabilizing realm in this battle, so you don't have to worry too much." Taoist Yu Lu laughed and said, "Taoist Yi Han, you're making things too difficult for us. Since the previous battle, we've realized that we don't have enough Taoist Tao. We're currently refining our treasures and comprehending the mysteries. I'm afraid we won't be able to leave. Please forgive us, Taoist Yi Han." Taoist Yi Han frowned. How could he not see through such an obvious excuse? He thought about it and figured out the reason, so he patiently said, "If the three of you are worried about Azure Saint, then there's no need for that. He has already promised me that he won't interfere in this matter." Ancestor Yao Han didn't say anything. Even he himself didn't believe in a promise. Putting himself in the shoes of others, he wouldn't believe them. Moreover, even if Azure Saint didn't interfere and he went over to help, he would only be repaying the favor. He wouldn't get much benefit and would instead attract more enemies. Although he had formed a good relationship with Taoist Yi Han, the other party was a treasure spirit, and it would be impossible for them to walk the same path in the future. When Taoist Yi Han saw that the other party had no intention of responding to his conditions, he knew that they were not going to help him. He looked at them coldly and didn't say anything else. With a flicker of his shadow, he disappeared. Taoist Yu Qiu sighed and said, "I'm afraid we've offended this person this time." Ancestor Yao Han said, "It doesn't matter. I don't have any friendship with this person. Even if I refuse, it won't matter. Besides, even if the one who has karma with me wants to turn against me, it will only be after he's repaid the favor. Taoist Yi Han knew that his plan had failed after his virtual body failed. While he was speaking, he had been forced to endure several rounds of attacks from both sides, and the magic power in his body had been weakened to the lowest level. If he did not retreat in time, he might even be forcefully suppressed by his opponent. Although they might not be able to do anything to him, if his opponent didn't release their magical power to suppress him, he could only be restrained here and not be able to do anything. This was something he couldn't tolerate. He took out the golden bell and the jade cup at the same time to slightly alleviate the surging magical power. Then he took out a spell, and a stream of qi came to receive him. In just an instant, he turned into a flash of light and escaped with his Dharma treasures. As Zhang Yan watched him leave, he fell into deep thought. Just now, when he was attacking this person, the other party used the jade cup to swallow his magical power. But when he was dealing with Bu Shutian's Weili, he didn't do so. Instead, he directly used his magical power to attack. This didn't seem wrong because his magical power was released after being deduced from the jade fragment, so it seemed stronger, while Bu Shutian's power was relatively weaker. But he felt that the problem wasn't that simple. If it was only once, it would be fine. But this happened several times in a row, which was enough to show that the other party didn't want Bu Shutian's Weili to come into contact with his own treasure of fortune. He couldn't judge the reason for this until he saw the real result. But with the imminent threat of that existence, that person wouldn't give up so easily, so there should be another chance to come into contact with him. At this time, he sensed something and saw Taoist Zhang Yuan's figure appear. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for helping me, Taoist friend." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't need to thank me, Taoist friend. I promised Taoist friend Shunchang that since the enemy is here, I will help him." After a few more words, because they didn't know how Taoist Shunchang was doing at the moment, they both turned into virtual bodies and entered the realm of tranquility. At this moment, Shunchang Boy had already retreated and disappeared. Taoist Shunchang's consciousness once again appeared in front of him. Seeing the two people in front of him, he cupped his hands and said apologetically, "I didn't expect that I would be so careless and almost let that person succeed. It's really my fault." Taoist Zhang Yuan hurriedly said, "How is this Taoist friend's fault? The matter of that consciousness is really unpredictable. Besides, it's thanks to Taoist friend's caution that that person didn't manage to escape." Taoist Shunchang said worriedly, "When that person came out, I was completely ignorant, as if I had completely lost myself. If I don't find a way to suppress this matter, I'm afraid a similar situation will occur again." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If Taoist friend is worried about this, then you don't have to worry about it." Taoist Shunchang attached great importance to his opinion and said solemnly, "Can Taoist friend advise me?" Zhang Yan said, "Taoist friend, you're too serious. You're just afraid that your consciousness will be taken away by that person. But if that person could really do it, why would he need to summon an outsider here? As for this time's body being taken away, from what Taoist has seen just now, it's just that that person's Tao heart is pure. If Taoist friend is firm and unwavering in your Tao path, then you won't be troubled by this." Taoist Shunchang was silent for a moment before he sighed and said, "Taoist friend, you're right." Then he fell into deep thought. Zhang Yan knew that he was thinking of a solution, so he didn't disturb him. After bidding farewell to Taoist Zhang Yan, he dispersed his virtual body and returned his consciousness to his real body. Then he also began to think about something. After reaching the spirit refinement realm, because spirit refinement cultivators were immortal, no matter how many times he defeated his opponent would always be able to fight back. Even if he won, it would only be a temporary victory, and he couldn't really do anything to his opponent. Unless he could use absolute power to separate his opponent from the real world and completely suppress him into eternal silence. He thought that if he could control Bu Shutian and borrow most of its power, he might be able to solve this problem. But now, he was still quite far away from this step. Even with his current cultivation, he felt that Bu Shutian was like a vast and unfathomable ocean. He couldn't see the end of it even if he was drifting on it, let alone stirring up a tide. He thought about it again. Since he couldn't drive his opponent into eternal silence, he could only find a way to restrain him. It didn't need to be too long. As long as he could endure until his cultivation reached the level of understanding, then it would be considered a success. Chapter 1964. Zhang Yan did not come up with this idea out of thin air. When he used the Bushtian Weili to deal with Taoist Yihan, he felt that he should not just use it as a form of mana. This kind of power was self-contained, but it was also combined into a ball. If it could be separated and fell into the real world, after a long time of life and death, it was likely to turn into a single fragment of good fortune. Therefore, as long as it was controlled properly, it could be used to trap enemies. However, there was one thing that needed to be noted. If others came into contact with Bushtian for a long time, they might be able to use the Weili here. For example, Taoist Qing Xing wanted to enter this place to seek shelter. However, Shen Lian believed that Taoist Qing Sheng also had a purpose to explore this place. The more this was the case, the more he could not let Taoist Qing Xing do as he wished. Although he could borrow a little of the Bushtian Weili now, it was only a guiding method. He only needed to think about it. If he wanted to completely control it, it would be impossible unless he used his own mana to support the power. This was not desirable because if he did so, it would become a confrontation between him and the Bushtian Weili. However, if the borrowed Weili was too small, it would not be of much use. Thinking about this, he began to consider whether to use the magic treasure to help. As long as he refined a magic treasure that could carry the Bushtian Weili and used it to guide and trap people with it, it should be possible, and it was relatively simple. Although this would cause him to need a magic treasure for every person he trapped, which was a fragment of good fortune, there were only a few powerful beings in the spirit refinement realm who were enemies with him. Based on the current conditions, it was very feasible. This idea was quickly rejected by him because he had a feeling that he did not need to use this to find a way. Why could the Bushtian Weili be guided by his mind? As he delved deeper into the mysteries, he understood a little, but he could not completely understand it. For the time being, he could see the Bushtian as a magnified sea of mind. When his mind moved, waves would appear. However, compared to the Bushtian, he was too weak, so he could only stir a little. Like a stone falling into the sea, there would always be a splash. The more a cultivator could immerse himself in the Bushtian, the more profound his cultivation would be, and the bigger the waves he could create. However, this was not without limits. For example, at his current stage, he could not immerse himself because it was very likely that he would be merged into one by the Bushtian. But if he were to draw out a portion of the mighty energy and transform it into his own energy, then wouldn't he be able to rely on this to draw out even more energy? With this thought, he immediately mobilized a small part of the Bushtian Weili and transferred his own qi into it. Usually, if a spirit ascension cultivator's wish was directed towards that direction, then the situation would definitely develop towards that direction. If it didn't work out, then it meant that there were many external forces interfering. Logically speaking, as long as this part of the obstruction was overcome, it would not be difficult to achieve his goal. At this moment, under his careful effort, the Weili slowly changed and became more inclined to his qi. However, this change was very small and the process was very slow. If he wanted to succeed, he did not know how long it would take. Instead of relying on this, he might as well rely on his cultivation. However, he was not disappointed because of this. This was only to verify his own idea. Now that it was feasible, he could continue. Thus, his mind sank into the broken jade and tried to deduce how to repel the external forces that were not beneficial to him. After repeated deductions, he found a way to solve most of the obstacles, but there was still a part that remained. Perhaps this was Bushtian's own imprint, or perhaps he could not overcome it until he truly controlled Bushtian. However, even if he ignored this, just using the rest was enough for him. His mind withdrew from the broken jade and began to try to assimilate this part of the Weili. This time, his progress was smooth, and the power was gradually changing in the direction he wanted. In other words, After he completed it, he would be able to truly control the Bushtian Whaley. And with this power, he would be able to mobilize even more mighty powers. However, he also understood that because it was not perfect, there were still flaws. If he fought against an enemy and used it, he would have to be careful at all times and use a part of his magic power to suppress it. If he did not restrain this part of the power for a long time, it would return to Bushtian and return to its original state. Although his magic power was endless, he still had to consider the magic power of other godly refinement cultivators colliding with him. It could be said that his magic power was his external shield. Once the shield was lost, he could only be trampled on by others. The larger the magic power ripple, the more it could protect him. Fortunately, it was not a big problem to retreat a little. Moreover, if it was only for the sake of trapping a capable opponent, then it was completely worth it. Moreover, this part of the flaw in his mind could be avoided. He could use the magic treasures as sustenance, and when his magic power receded, he could replace himself to control this part of the power. In doing so, he only needed one magic treasure to control it, and it was far better than using it to refine one magic treasure at a time. However, right now, he did not have any creation fragments. Although there were 2 here, they were left here by Taoist Shunchang and did not belong to him. Since he had not decided to let Bushtian go, he would definitely not use it. Fortunately, this matter could be solved later. After he assimilated this small part of the Bushtian Whaley and tested it in battle, it would not be too late to think about this. In the following days, he cultivated and tried to control the Bushtian Whaley. Unknowingly, a long time had passed. If he was in the present world, perhaps millions of years had passed. However, if he did not transfer his consciousness to the present world, then it would be meaningless to him. There would only be the birth and death of countless realms, and the rise and fall of magic power between cultivators of the same path. This tranquility was finally broken by an external wave of Dharma power. He could not help but open his eyes. He saw the phantom of Taoist Zhangyun coming from outside and bowing to him, saying, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan got up and returned the greeting. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, did you come here because fellow Taoist Xinchang has made a decision?" He sensed that there was no collision of magic power in the area suppressed by the Tai golden bead, so there should not be any external enemies. Zhang Yuan came to find him at this moment, most likely to deal with the other consciousness. Taoist Zhang Yuan sighed and said, "Fellow Taoist guessed correctly. Fellow Taoist Shunchang thinks it is better to use your method to split the 2 consciousnesses as soon as possible." Zhang Yan said, "It seems that fellow Taoist has found a treasure embryo to carry it?" Taoist Zhang Yun said, "Yes. Treasure embryos were unfinished treasures and were only useful to the creation treasure spirit. They were not as eye-catching as the creation fragments, so it was actually easier to find them. However, he had still spent a long time and just now had found one. He bowed again and said, "But I still need fellow Taoist's help. May I invite you to come with me and have a chat?" Zhang Yan nodded his head. Then, he also created a phantom and followed Taoist Zhangyun into the world-stabilizing realm. As soon as he entered this place, he found that the scenery was very different from the last time. Originally, there was a stalemate between yin and yang, but now the 2 qis were turbulent. One retreated while the other advanced, and the other advanced while the other retreated. This indicated that the master of this world's Tao heart was not stable. Seeing Zhang Yan arrive, Taoist Shunchang solemnly bowed to him and said, "I'm sorry to trouble fellow Taoist again. I'm really ashamed. After fellow Taoist left, no matter how I think about it, I feel that my Tao heart is not as pure as that person's. If he comes out next time and I still can't stop him, I'm afraid the situation will be bad." Zhang Yan glanced at him and saw that although he looked calm on the surface, there was a hidden worry in his eyes. It was probably because of this that the stable world was so turbulent. In fact, in his opinion, there was no need to be so anxious about this matter. After cutting off the possibility of the treasured embryo from the outside entering, Taoist Shunchang's cultivation would only get higher and higher. Now, the advantage was on their side. Moreover, every time he fought with an enemy, he could benefit from it and learn more from it. This was not necessarily a bad thing. But he could also understand Taoist Shenchang's way of doing things. There was an existence that could seize his body and consciousness at any time. In the past, there was no way to deal with it. Now that there was a way, he had to find a way to get rid of it. Moreover, if he didn't get rid of it, he was afraid that even the stable world would not be able to be maintained. When the seal disappeared, it would be useless to say anything. It seemed that the weakness of the treasure spirit of creation was even greater than he had imagined. He thought for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, I already understand what you mean. But fellow Taoist needs to think carefully. If that person obtains the whole body, it may not necessarily be a good thing. If boy Shenchang came out, it would be another trouble. The real body could be said to be both important and unimportant at the same time. It was said to be important because even the mighty people of the spirit refinement realm could only exist with the real body. Just now, he could be considered as an independent individual. Only then could he stand in the void, reflect on the reality and fight against the people of the same generation, so that he would not fall into eternal silence. It was said to be unimportant because the treasure spirit of creation was born after shedding its treasure shell. Moreover, it had its own consciousness. As long as the consciousness was not restrained, it could be molded again no matter what it was. If boy Shenchang obtained the real body, then with his pure Taoist heart, his cultivation and mana would soon surpass Taoist Shenchang. By then, it was very likely that he would go around looking for treasured spirits to devour and take the righteous path that he mentioned. Taoist Shenchang sighed and said, "There's nothing we can do about it. Let's not talk about that person. Last time, when we were attacked by external enemies, although we managed to avoid them, this person will not easily give up. Just looking at that magic treasure, he must have a helper behind him, so we won't be able to avoid them every time." Taoist Zhangyun also said, "Today, we invited you here for this matter. As long as fellow Taoist Shenchang can separate that person's consciousness into the treasure fetus, then we can work together to suppress it. Then, we won't have to worry about it coming out and causing trouble." Taoist Shenchang nodded and said, "That's right. If this matter can be solved, I can be free and go out to search for the good fortune fragment without worry." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and thought of an idea. As soon as the idea came to his mind, he decided to give it a try and said, "I wonder if the two of you can allow I to meet with that person again?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.